The morning they decided to kill me, a knight named Varric held up an empty grain ledger and told the whole muster yard that I had eaten the army. Not stolen from it, eaten it. Like I had personally chewed through a season of rations with my little clerk teeth. I am Kael, 24 years old, 0 magic, no combat class, no title worth spitting on. I carried sacks, counted barrels, fixed cart axles, and boiled bad water for the field healer. In an army of swords, I was the man who wrote down how many swords there were. That was the whole crime, really. I counted things. And when you count things honestly, you eventually count the wagons that go missing on Varric's supply runs and end up sold in towns that were never on any requisition. He knew I had the numbers. So before I could show them to anyone who mattered, he walked into the yard, slammed the ledger on a drum, and announced that the missing grain had gone into my thieving belly. The soldiers did not cheer. They just looked at their boots. Every one of them had eaten thin that winter, and here was a soft-handed supply rat to blame. It is easy to believe the small, ugly man did it. Varric crossed the mud toward me, smiling, like this was the best part of his week. I opened my mouth to say the wagons were his, that I had the tally marks, that 3 names in his own hand matched 3 sales. He hit me before the first word cleared my teeth. His gauntlet caught me across the jaw, and the world went white and copper. I sat down hard in the freezing muck and spat something red between my knees. A supply rat, he said, loud for the crowd, grew fat on the king's grain while soldiers starved. His voice was warm. That is the thing about men like Varric. Cruelty makes them cozy. Then a voice cut across the yard that did not belong to a soldier. Lena, my wife. Shoving between 2 guards with her healer's satchel still slung across her chest, because of course she had run the whole way. Do not let her talk. That was my only thought as she reached me, because Lena was not soft-handed, and she was not afraid of Varric. And worst of all, she was smart. She had seen his real books when she treated his steward for gut rot. She knelt, pressed her sleeve to my split mouth, and said the sentence that doomed us both. She said loudly that she had seen the second ledger, the private one, the one with the sales in it. The yard went quiet in a bad way. Varric stopped smiling. For half a heartbeat, I watched a corrupt knight do the math that all corrupt men do, which is not who is right, but who saw. She had seen. So she was a problem. And Varric solved problems the way he solved everything, by making them disappear before anyone with authority arrived. Take the woman, he said. Dangerous witness. Question her elsewhere. 2 guards took Lena by the arms. She did not scream. She looked straight at me over her shoulder, steady, and told me to run, to get the tally to the garrison captain. To not be a hero because I was terrible at it. That was Lena, being dragged off to a quiet death and still correctly assessing my skill set. I have never loved anyone more or been more useless in a single moment. Something in my chest went very cold and very fast. Not brave, the opposite. The animal part of me understood, before my brain did, that if I stayed in that yard 1 more minute, there would be no witnesses left at all. So I ran. I grabbed the worthless grain ledger off the drum because my hands wanted to hold something, and I bolted for the gap in the pickets while a knight in the mud shouted that the rat was fleeing, which proved everything. The chapel graveyard sat behind the old garrison, all leaning stones and dead grass, and one squat mausoleum that the priests had stopped using because it flooded. I went for it because it was the only place with a door. 4 knights came after me. I could hear their harnesses ringing, boots eating the distance a lot faster than my clerk legs could make it. I am not built for this, I remember thinking. I am built for inventory. The mausoleum door hung half off its hinge. I threw myself through the gap into cold black air that smelled of wet stone and older, worse things. And I kept going down, because the floor kept going down, a throat of broken steps swallowing me into the dark. Behind me, torchlight bloomed. The knights had come in. Of course they had. 4 armed men chasing one bleeding accountant into a hole. This was, by any honest measure, the stupidest possible way to die. I hit the bottom of the steps and spun with my back to a wall, holding an empty ledger like a shield, which is the sort of decision your body makes when your brain has given up its lease. The 4 of them fanned into the chamber, torches high, steel out. Varric was not with them. He would never come into a hole himself. But his men had that eager look, the one that says the killing part is finally here. And then they stopped. They did not stop for me. That is the detail I want you to hold on to. 4 armored killers with me cornered and bleeding, and every single one of them looked straight past my shoulder into the dark behind me and went still. I have replayed that moment 1,000 times since. The way the lead knight's torch arm started to shake. The way his mouth opened with no sound. I was the prey, but I was not. It turned out, the thing in the room worth being afraid of. Slowly, because my body had decided slowness was survival, I turned my head. The dark behind me was not empty. The dark behind me had eyes. Dozens of them, low to the ground, paired and yellow, catching the torchlight in a wide, silent arc across a chamber far bigger than any flooded crypt had a right to be. Goblins, ranks of them, small and gray-green and wiry, packed shoulder to shoulder along the walls and up carved ledges I had not known were there, holding stone and bone and rusted iron, watching the 5 humans who had just fallen into their house. So, this was my situation. 4 knights in front, who wanted me dead. An entire tribe of goblins behind, who wanted, presumably, all of us dead. And me in the middle, cornered, unarmed, holding paperwork. I did the only thing my body still knew how to do under that much pressure. I froze completely, smiled a wide, idiotic smile at nobody, and felt my knees begin a small, private earthquake beneath me. That was when my back bumped something that had been standing behind me the whole time. Something that did not move because it had not been alive in a very long time. I turned enough to see it. A seated shape on a raised stone, dressed in rotted burial cloth, tipped sideways with age. And on the floor at its feet, where it must have slipped from dead fingers, lay a mask. Bone white, carved to look like a goblin face, pulled long and cruel and kingly, ringed with old dark metal. Every eye in that chamber, human and goblin both, was fixed on it, as if the whole room had been waiting for someone to notice it was there. Behind me, a knight found his voice and whispered a prayer. In front of me, the goblins pressed forward a single step, a low sound moving through them like wind through dry grass. And my clever, cowardly clerk brain served up one thought. Everyone in this room respects that mask more than they respect me. So maybe, just maybe, I should stop being me. I dropped the ledger, I bent, and I picked up the mask, and with the calm of a man who has entirely run out of better ideas, I lifted the dead Goblin King's face and pressed it over my own. It was cold and it fit wrong, and it smelled like a grave. The chamber inhaled, and in the sudden ringing silence, I understood I now had the full and undivided attention of everyone who wanted to murder me, which was, technically, progress. Then a pane of cold blue light unrolled itself across the inside of the mask, hanging in front of my eyes where only I could see it, and calm letters wrote themselves into the dark. Crown Ledger activated. Host, unknown human. Mask status, recognized by the tribe. Food, 2 days. Loyalty, unstable. Prisoners, none yet. Authority, 10. I did not understand a word of it. I understood, distantly, that a magic system had just decided I was a king, which was news, because 10 minutes ago the leading theory had been that I was a rat. I had no time to enjoy the promotion, because the largest goblin near the front lifted a rusted cleaver and made a sound that was clearly a question, and the question was clearly about the 4 armored snacks standing in his home. Every instinct I had said do nothing, say nothing, apologize. But a small goblin near the front, barely knee-high, with ears too big for his head, was staring at me with an open mouth and a hope on his face that I could not stand to be the one to break. So I raised my hand. I did not mean anything by it. It was a flinch dressed up as a gesture, half a wave and half a plea, the move of a man asking a room to please calm down. The small goblin shrieked, not in fear, in joy. He spun to the others and screamed that the king had made the old sign, the returning sign, the sign from the songs. His name, I would learn, was Crick, and Crick would go on to spend the coming months being wrong in the most useful ways possible. And the tribe knelt, all of them, in a rolling wave from the front ranks to the dark ledges above, dozens of goblins folding down onto the cold stone with their weapons laid flat, heads bowed to the bleeding accountant in the dead man's mask. The 4 knights stared at this. I stared at this. Somewhere behind the bone, I could feel my own face doing something hysterical. I clamped it down into what I hoped was royal stillness, and was probably closer to lockjaw. The lead knight, God help him, chose that moment to be brave. He shouted that this was witchcraft, that I was a fraud, and he lunged at me with his sword because killing the king would surely end the spell. He did not reach me. 20 goblins reached him first. It was fast, and it was ugly, and it was very loud, and in about 4 seconds, all 4 knights were flat on the stone, disarmed, pinned, alive, but extremely rethinking their life choices. The tribe looked up at me then, waiting, every yellow eye asking the same thing. What does the king want done with them? And here's where a braver, dumber man would have said something grand. What I actually felt was the mask's cold light flicker, and new words waited under my chin. And I understood, on pure animal accounting, that 4 live men are worth more than 4 dead ones, though I could not yet have told you how. Take them alive, I said. My voice cracked in the middle of it. Alive. Bind them. Do not eat them. I added the last part because I had seen the way one goblin was eyeing the fattest knight, and honestly, alive sounded so much less insane to say out loud than the alternative. So I went with it, on pure instinct, and hoped it looked like mercy. The crown ledger flickered. Edict confirmed. Prisoners. 4. Loyalty, still unstable. Authority. 10. The light was not impressed by a lucky order from a man who could not yet feed a single goblin mouth. The goblins dragged 4 screaming knights into the dark to be bound, and I stood there in a stolen face, king of a hole, and let myself breathe for 1 entire second. 1 second was all I got, because when I turned my head, one goblin was not kneeling. She stood off to the side, older than the rest, gray threaded through the green. A shaman's rattle of teeth and bone hung from a staff she leaned on, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And she was not looking at the mask. She was looking at my hands. At my human hands, soft and ink-stained and pink, gripping the edge of the bone where the mask met my jaw. And her face held no wonder and no worship, only a tired, terrible, wide-awake knowing. She waited until the others had hauled the prisoners away, until the chamber had emptied of everyone who still believed. Then she crossed the stone to me, slow, and stopped close enough that only I could hear her voice. "Our king," she said quietly, "died 3 nights ago. I have his body in the cold room below. I have told no one, because a tribe without a king tears itself apart before the moon turns." She tilted her head, and the torchlight caught eyes far too clever to lie to. "So," she said, "you wear his face and his light answers you, and you are as human as the men you just spared." She let that sit. Then, she asked the only question that mattered, the one that would decide whether I walked out of that crypt a king or a corpse. "Who are you?" she said, "and what will it cost me to keep your secret?" Here is a thing I learned in the space of 1 breath. When a tired woman with a bone staff asks who you really are, and she is the only reason you are not already dead, you do not get clever. I tried anyway. I tried to say something kingly and vague, and the mask flickered cold against my face, and the blue light under my chin scrawled a small, unhelpful note. Host attempting falsehood, recognition weakening. Raga watched the light dim through the eye slits and made a sound that was almost a laugh. "So it does that," she said. "Good. It means I do not have to catch every lie myself. Save us both the time." So I told her the truth, all of it, fast and ugly. "I am Kael. I count grain for an army. A knight named Varric framed me for his own theft, took my wife as a witness, and I ran into a hole to avoid dying and put on a dead man's face by accident." I braced for her to scream for the tribe. She did not. She leaned on her staff and looked at me the way my old paymaster used to look at a broken cart, measuring what could still be salvaged from the wreck. 3 nights ago the king died in his sleep," she said, "old and finally quiet. I have kept his body cold and his death secret because I know exactly what happens the morning this tribe learns there is no king." She told me what happens. 3 chiefs, 3 factions, each certain the crown is theirs. They tear the tribe into pieces over a corpse, and then the humans and the other clans pick off the pieces one by one until there is nothing left to bury. "A dead king cannot give orders," she said. "A dead king cannot hold 3 hungry chiefs apart. But a living king, even a strange one, even a soft pink one who smells of ink, is a wall they will not cross while the mask still glows." I understood then that I was not being worshipped. I was being used, which, honestly, was a relief. Worship I could not survive. A transaction I understood down to my bones. "So do not think of yourself as saved," she went on. "Think of yourself as useful. The moment you stop being useful, or the moment they see those hands for what they are, I am 3 steps away and I never knew you." A weaker man would have begged her to protect him. I have begged before. It does not pay well. Instead, I did what a quartermaster does with a threat, which is turn it into a contract with terms. "Then we want the same thing," I said. "You need a king so the tribe holds together. I need a tribe so Varric does not find a lonely clerk to murder. You keep my secret, I keep your tribe alive. We are not friends, we are suppliers." Something shifted behind her eyes. Not warmth. Respect is not warmth. It is the look someone gives you when you turn out to be a harder tool than they expected. The mask light steadied and wrote 2 words for me alone. Oracle contact. But she was not finished, because people like Raga are never finished. "Useful," she repeated. "By dawn the chiefs will come to see what kind of king the mask coughed up. A king who only forbids things is not a king. He is a scold in a nice hat. Prove you can feed them, or hold them, or lead them somewhere before the sun finds this crypt. Do that, and I keep breathing your lie. Fail, and the mask will not save you, because a hungry goblin stops seeing the crown and starts seeing the meat." Then she turned and left me alone with a dead man in the cold and a deadline I did not ask for. Somewhere in the dark, Crick was whispering my legend to anyone who would listen, getting every detail wrong, making me sound magnificent. I had until dawn to become worth keeping. I had no army, no magic, no plan, and a splitting headache. What I did have, it turned out, was the one skill nobody in that crypt respected. I knew how to count. By the time gray light began to leak down the broken stairs, I had asked to see where the tribe kept its food. This request caused confusion because the tribe did not keep its food anywhere. The tribe kept its food in a pile and defended the pile with teeth. The pile lived in a side chamber, guarded by whoever was strongest that hour. And the strongest that hour was a chief the size of a door, with a scar that pulled one eye half shut, who looked at me approaching his horde and bared a mouthful of filed teeth. His name was Bruck. Bruck did not believe in kings who did not bleed, and he especially did not believe in a king who wanted to look at the food instead of eat it. When I asked him to let me count the stores, he laughed so hard he had to lean on the wall. "The king wants to count," he roared to the chamber. "The great returned king is going to count the bones. Warriors starve and the crown does arithmetic." He wiped his eyes. "I have waited my whole life to be ruled by a bookkeeper." I let him laugh. Let a man like Bruck feel clever for 1 minute, and he will stand still long enough for you to work. I crouched by the pile and opened the thing the mask had been offering me since the throne room. Royal inventory. The blue light spread over the horde and began, quietly, to tally. Dried roots, so many. Strips of old meat, so many. Sacks of grain stolen from some farm, so many. And beside each count, a second number, the one that mattered. What yesterday's tally should have left. The two numbers did not match. Someone was eating the tribe from the inside. Every night, the common store lost more than the mouths around it could explain. Not a raid, a leak. A quiet hand in the dark taking a share it had not earned. Raga drifted close and did a beautiful thing. She raised her voice and told the watching goblins that the king was performing the old royal audit, the sacred count the first kings used to weed out thieves from the loyal. Half of that was invented. All of it bought me room. I did not accuse anyone. Accusation is loud and stupid and gets your throat opened. Instead, I asked a smaller question. If food is leaving at night, it has to go somewhere close, because a full-bellied thief does not walk far in the cold. Where is the warm, dry corner nobody guards? Crick knew, of course. Crick knew every corner. He led two goblins to a gap behind a fallen slab, and they dragged out a private little cache of stolen rations, hidden by the one creature who had decided tomorrow was a lie, and today was all there would ever be. The thief was not a monster. He was thin and terrified, and had simply stopped believing food would come again. But he had been taking from the sick and the small to feed his own fear, and the chamber saw it, and the chamber went quiet. Crick, sensing a ceremony, announced that the king had smelled the lie in the dark with royal nose magic. I did not correct him. A reputation for nose magic costs me nothing and buys me a great deal of quiet cooperation. But not everyone was impressed. Half the chamber looked at the thief with disgust. The other half looked at the sealed store and saw a soft king who fed columns of marks instead of warriors. A crown does not settle an argument. It only decides where the argument happens next. Bruck stopped laughing. That was the first time I turned his mockery back on him. Small as it was, but I felt it land. He had called me a bookkeeper as an insult, and the bookkeeper had just found the enemy inside his own horde without lifting a hand or spilling a drop of blood. The crown ledger warmed against my cheek. Royal inventory, level 1, store discipline established. Food waste, down 30 parts in 100. Authority, 10 to 20. It was not much, but it was the first number I had earned instead of stumbled into. I sealed the store under a marked count, gave the key of it to Raga because I trusted no chief yet, and set a simple law. Every mouth is written down, every mouth is fed in order. Take from the common store in secret, and the whole tribe sees your name against the missing marks. And here is where I learned that being right is the cheapest part of leading. The numbers were perfect. The trust was not. The thief had not stolen because he was wicked. He had stolen because he did not believe my store would still have food in 3 days. Correct math does not fill a frightened stomach. Bruck said as much, quieter now but not beaten. A full belly beats a full ledger, king. You caught one thief. You did not make 1 grain of new food. Count all you like. The pile only shrinks. He was right, and I hated that he was right. A store only means something if something flows into it. I had organized our hunger very neatly. I had made scarcity easy to see. What I had not done, not yet, was make more of anything. That was tomorrow's problem, and tomorrow was already awake. It walked into the chamber on 2 small feet in the shape of a goblin woman with a child on her hip who was not crying anymore, which was worse than crying. Her name was Nara. Her son had not held down food in 2 days and had gone the quiet gray that mothers of every species learn to fear. She did not come to me for justice or for the mask. She came because someone had told her the king now decided who ate, and she wanted her boy to be on the list. That was the moment the ledger stopped being a spreadsheet. There is a number in a column, and then there is a small gray child breathing too fast, and they are supposed to be the same fact, and they are not the same fact at all. I put her son on the list at the top of it, and I gave from the sealed store, and Raga watched me do it with an expression I had not earned yet and did not fully trust. She was seeing something, that the mask on a coward could still be turned to cover the weak, and not only the coward. But a spoonful of roots was not going to save a starving child, and I knew it, and I needed food I did not have. Which sent my clerk brain, at last, to the 4 warm bodies tied up in the next room. Not as meat. Bruck wanted them as meat. Meat is one meal, and then it is gone. A living prisoner is not one meal. A living prisoner is a mouth that knows things. Where the convoys run, where the garrisons are thin, where they took a healer named Lena. So I did not feed my tribe the nights. I went to feed myself something better, which was information. 3 of the 4 spat at me. The 4th was young, barely older than a squire, with the particular honesty of a man who has decided that dignity is a luxury and survival is the only currency left. His name was Thomas. I made him the same offer I made Raga, because it is the only honest offer I have. Not friendship, terms. You are worth more to me talking than screaming. Tell me things that are true, and you eat, and you keep your skin. Lie, and the mask has warriors who are still hungry. Thomas talked. He talked the way a drowning man grabs a rope, fast and without pride. And most of it was small, garrison gossip and supply routes, the coin I trade in. Until I asked, as flatly as I could manage, about the healer woman the knights had taken. He went still. Then he told me the thing that put ice down my spine. She was not sent to a holding camp. Varric handed her up the chain. She was taken to Baron Odrin, at his tower, because a witness who has seen a knight's crooked books is worth keeping where nobles keep their secrets. Odrin was not a name I could raid. He held the district taxes, the trade roads, and the healer tower where physicians were licensed and kept in line. It seemed the same tower was where inconvenient witnesses were quietly filed. Varric was only a thief with a sword. Odrin was the whole system that made thieves like Varric possible. I had spent the night learning I could feed a store and catch a thief and hold a room. And in one sentence, a tied-up boy told me none of it was enough. My wife was not in a field cell I could raid. She was behind a baron, in a stone tower, under the one man in the region I could not simply count my way past. The Crown Ledger, quiet witness to all of it, wrote its verdict as Nara's son finally, weakly, kept down his first spoonful. Edict confirmed, prisoner value, meat to intelligence, food, 3 effective days, authority, 20 to 35. Every part of me that was still just a husband wanted to walk up those broken stairs and go get her, tower or no tower, army or no army. I stood there, and I did not move, and it was the hardest arithmetic I have ever done. A husband who runs at a baron's tower with no plan, gets his wife killed and himself with her. But a king, even a fake one, even a bookkeeper in a bone mask, might build something big enough to reach her. So I looked at the mask's cold light, and I hated precisely how well it was starting to fit, and I made myself get back to the work of being a king I never wanted to be. The chiefs came for their king at first light, which in a crypt just means the moment the torches burn low enough to argue by. 3 of them, with Bruck in front, because a man who mocks you at night likes to lead the delegation in the morning. They had a simple plan, and I will give them this. It was honest. There is a human village 2 valleys over. It has grain, pigs, and a fence a child could climb. Raid it, take everything, feed the warriors, and let the returned king lead the charge. Every part of it was a knife pointed at my own throat. A raid means goblins die on that fence. A raid means burned farms and screaming farmers send riders, and riders bring Varric, and Varric brings the one baron holding my wife. The mask told me the cost in cold blue math the moment I thought about it. Raid casualty risk, high. I did not need a magic window to know that a village raid was how a small hidden tribe became a hunted one, and how a hidden king became a corpse with a store. But I could not just say no. I had learned that lesson at the store. A king who only forbids things is a scold in a nice hat. And Bruck was already halfway to deciding I was exactly that. So I did what I do. I stalled, and I counted, and I asked the mask a different question. Not what do we take from them, what do we already have? And the Crown Ledger, obliging, ran its light down into the chambers below us and marked something I had walked past twice without seeing. Humidity, high. Old growth traces. The lower crypt was damp, black, and quietly full of the ghost of something that had once been farmed there. Raga saw me staring at nothing, and came to read the same walls I could not. Her fingers found marks cut into the stone below the waterline, older than the burials above, and her voice changed. Before this tribe raided, she said, it grew. The first kings farmed the dark down here, pale food that needs no sun. We forgot how, the way you forget anything you are ashamed of. There it was. Food that did not require a single fence or a single funeral. I turned to the chiefs with the specific confidence of a man who has just found a second option, and I told them we were not going to raid the village. We were going to grow our own food, in the dark, from the old beds, like the first kings did. The silence lasted as long as it took Bruck to understand the word I had used. Grow, he repeated. Then he laughed, and this time it was worse than the store, because this time he had an audience of chiefs to play to. The great returned king, he announced to the chamber, is going to feed his warriors mold. He is going to lead us to glory by farming rot in a grave. He looked around for agreement and got it. A low, ugly ripple of it, and I felt my authority thin like ice in the sun. Crick, of course, chose that exact moment to fall to his knees before a patch of damp wall and declare the sacred mold blessed. It did not help. It did, however, make me laugh under the mask, which steadied me more than any speech could have. Here's the trap I was in. The store bought us 3 days. In 3 days, the food ran out, and when the food ran out, the chiefs would raid whether I blessed it or not, and I would have proven, permanently, that the mask had chosen a soft man who fed columns and grew fungus. 2 valleys away, Varric had not forgotten the clerk who ran. He told his men the coward had bolted into the old graveyard and gone to ground like a rat, and rats get dug out at leisure. He was in no hurry. That was the mistake I was quietly counting on. Varric pictured a starving man curled in the dark, waiting to be found. He did not picture a farm. Men who only ever take do not think to look for someone learning how to make. I had 3 days to make the dark produce food. I had never grown a mushroom in my life. I had, however, spent a lot of years watching things spoil in storerooms and writing down exactly why, which turns out to be the same knowledge pointed the other way. We went to work. I had the goblins scrape the pale spore from the old beds and press it into damp rot and dung down in the wet lower chamber. And I did the thing that felt clever and was, in fact, the seed of my next humiliation. I packed the beds tight, close together, stacked, every handwidth of that warm, damp room put to use, because my whole life had taught me that space is precious and you fill it. Maximum beds, maximum food, maximum king. I was very pleased with myself for about a day and a half. Then the smell reached us. Not the earthy smell of growing, the other one. The wet black rot of something dying in a heap. I went down with a torch and found 4 of my 12 beds gone to slime, slick and stinking. The pale threads drowned in their own damp. Spoiled beds, 4 of 12, the mask reported, unhelpfully, as if I could not see it. Food gain delayed, and I felt the authority number under my chin give a small sick tremor, the light itself unsure about the king kneeling in a puddle of failure. 4 beds does not sound like much until you remember 4 beds was a third of everything I had promised. I had turned a third of our future into black slime by being too clever with space. The store had days left. The mockery had none. The tribe smelled it too. Word travels fast in a hole. By the time I climbed back up, Bruck did not even have to say anything, which was somehow worse. He looked at me, and then at the reeking stairs, and let the silence do his gloating for him. It was Graham who put it into words, and that stung more, because Graham was not cruel. He was an old, half-blind smith who remembered the old king, and he said, quietly, to no one and everyone, that the true king would have put humans on spears by now, not knelt in the dark, babysitting rot. Off to the side, a warrior I did not yet know was watching me. Tall for a goblin, still, with a spear she did not need to raise to make a point. Her eyes moved over me, the way a butcher's eyes move over a carcass, looking for the seam. That was my first real look at Gruna, and she was looking for weakness. I found her, distantly, the most dangerous thing in the room, and filed the thought for later. Right then, I had a more urgent problem, which was that I was standing in front of a tribe that had just watched their god grow slime. Crick tried to help. He declared the rot a second blessing, a deeper test of faith, and offered to worship the slime as well. Behind me, Gruna breathed out slowly through her nose. It was the most contemptuous sound I have ever heard anyone make without using a single word. I have a choice in moments like that. I can hide the mistake, or I can own it. Hiding is the instinct. Hiding is also how a clerk gets caught, because a covered heir just rots bigger. So I did the thing that felt insane. I told the truth about being wrong. I was wrong, I said, loud enough for the chamber. Not about the food, about the crowding. I stopped and looked at the beds like the ledger they were. 4 had rotted, 8 had not, and the difference between them was the only clue that mattered. The 8 that lived were near the wall cracks, where the air moved. The 4 that died were packed in the dead center, where the air just sat and went sour. It was not mold that beat me. It was my own greed for space, sealing the beds in their own breath. Raga did a merciful thing then, and a shrewd one. She did not rush to save me. She let the whole tribe watch me stand in the failure long enough that fixing it would count. Only then did she raise her voice and name it a trial. The king testing the earth testing the king back. So I fixed it the only way the problem allowed, air. The old builders of the crypt had cut vent shafts into the stone, long since choked with rubble and forgotten. I had them dug open, high and low, so cold air fell in one end and warm, damp air crawled out the other. I spaced the new beds wide, laid them along the moving air instead of against it, and set a small low fire at the base of one shaft to pull the draft through, the way a chimney drinks. Then, the hardest part for a man on a deadline, I waited, and I made the tribe wait with me. For 2 days I was the king who stared at wet wood. Bruck told anyone who would listen that the crown had gone mad in the dark. The food store dropped toward its last marks. Nara's boy, better but not well, watched the empty beds with the patience of a child who has learned not to hope out loud. On the 3rd day, the beds fruited. Pale caps pushed up through the damp in the moving air, thick along the shafts where the draft ran clean, exactly where the living beds had been and the dead ones had not. Not a miracle, just air and patience and a man who finally counted the right thing. But the tribe did not see arithmetic. The tribe saw food rising out of stone. The crown ledger warmed and, for once, agreed with me. Mushroom farm, level 1. Food store stabilized, food days, 3 to 5. Beds usable, 8. And under it all the small line I cared about most, loyalty, unstable to cautious. Cautious. From a tribe that 3 days ago watched me grow slime, I would take cautious. The payoff I remember is not the number. It is Nara ladling pale broth into a bowl and holding it to her son, and the boy drinking the whole thing, and then looking into the empty bowl like it might refill itself, and then looking at her, and her not having to tell him there was more. There was more. 5 days is not victory. 5 days is a longer fuse. 8 beds could feed the mouths we had, barely, but not one mouth more. And I could feel the tribe about to grow, whether I was ready or not. I had bought time, not a future. But time was the road to Lena, so I banked it and kept counting. And the moment I remember best is Bruck's own warriors. They grumbled, and they called it mold, and they ate it anyway because they were hungry. Then they came back with their bowls held out for a second helping, and Bruck watched his own men line up for the food he had called rot. Even Graham came down for a bowl. The old smith who had wanted humans on spears turned a pale cap over in his clouded fingers, tasted it, and said nothing at all. From Graham, I was already learning. Nothing at all was the closest thing to a yes he ever gave. Bruck did not apologize. Men like Bruck never apologize. But he stopped talking about the village raid, and in a hole where food is the only real crown, a chief who stops arguing has already knelt a little. I let him keep his pride. I had bigger creditors come. Because as the warriors ate, the tall, still warrior with the spear spoke, and the chamber quieted for her the way it never quieted for Bruck. Gruna did not raise her voice. She did not have to. She simply said what half the tribe was thinking, and none of them had dared. Feeding is not ruling, she said. Any farmer can grow a mushroom. She stepped closer, and the warriors made room, and I understood that this was the test I had been dreading since the throne room, the one no ledger could win for me. A crown that cannot fight is just a shiny thing waiting for a stronger hand to take it. Prove you are a king, she said, and not a cook in a dead man's face. And she looked at my soft pink hands, and my soft pink everything, and I knew with perfect clerk certainty that whatever she was about to demand, I was going to fail it in front of everyone. Gruna gave me until the fire burned down to name my terms. A king who is challenged gets to choose the trial. It is the one mercy in the old law, and I can feel her hoping I would be stupid enough to choose a fight, because she wanted a fight. A fight ends in one breath. She takes my wrist, she squeezes, the bones grind. The mask comes off in front of everyone, and the whole clever house of cards I had built comes down with it. One honest test of muscle, and I was a dead clerk. The mask, sensing the moment, offered me nothing useful. War Captain candidate detected. That was all. It flagged Gruna as something valuable, and then, in the same breath, informed me that my own combat rating was, and I am quoting the cold blue light exactly, hopeless. Thank you, I told the mask silently. Very kingly, very helpful. A crown that grades my swordsmanship down to hopeless, and then hands me nothing to swing with. If the old Goblin King could see who was wearing his face now, he would have died a second time out of pure spite. Crick, bless him, tried to arm me. He staggered up with a rock the size of his own torso, the sacred royal battle stone, which he had apparently just invented, and offered it to me so I could demonstrate my might by lifting it over my head. I could not have lifted that stone with a lever and a prayer. I looked at it. I looked at Gruna, who could probably lift Crick and the stone together and throw both. And I did the only thing that has ever kept me alive, which is refuse to play a game I am guaranteed to lose. No, I said. The chamber went still. You do not say no to a strength challenge. Refusing is the same as losing, and Gruna's mouth curled, already tasting it. But I was not refusing the test. I was refusing her definition of it, which is a very different and much more annoying thing. You want me to prove I am strong, I said, loud enough to carry. Fine, but you have picked the wrong measure, and a king who lets you pick a stupid measure deserves to lose. So let me ask the tribe a question first. I turned to the warriors, to the chiefs, to Nara at the back with her boy on her hip. When a chief leads a hunt and comes back with meat, but 3 of his hunters do not come back at all, I asked, is that strength? Or is that just a loud way to lose warriors you cannot replace? Nobody answered, which meant they were thinking, which was all I needed, because every goblin in that hole had buried someone who died, proving how brave they were. Strength that empties your own ranks is not strength. It is a slow suicide with good posture. Gruna's strength is real, I said. I will not insult it by pretending mine is the same kind. She can break me in half. Everyone here knows it, but breaking me proves she is strong. It does not prove I am weak at the thing a king is actually for. And what, she said, is a king actually for? Her voice was flat, but she had asked. That was the crack I needed. Once someone asks you a real question, you are no longer being judged. You are being listened to. Keeping you alive while you win, I said. So here's my trial. Not one fight between the 2 of us. A contest between teams. At the thing this tribe lives or dies by. Whoever brings home the most and loses the fewest doing it, wins. Strength measured in what we keep. The crown ledger warmed, quietly pleased with me for the first time all day, and unrolled a new function across my vision. Tribe task board, and on it, 3 clean columns waiting to be filled. Meat, iron, eyes on the land. The spreadsheet had become an arena, which is the only kind of arena I will ever win in. I set the tasks in front of the whole tribe, so no chief could claim I had rigged it. Bring back boars from the far wood, target 3. Bring back iron scrap from the old battlefield on the ridge, target 15 measures. Map the safe paths and count the human patrols, and lose no one doing any of it. Loss limit, 0. That last number was the one that mattered, and Gruna knew it the instant I said it. The chiefs wanted the meat and the iron because those were things a warrior could hold up and boast about. But 0, held against every column, was a leash on their pride, and they hated it, and they could not argue with it, because who wants to be the chief who argues for dead goblins? The strange part was how fast the boasting rerouted. Goblins are competitive the way fire is hot, and once I made the columns public, the same chiefs who had wanted a duel began arguing over who would haul the most iron and map the most trail. Crick appointed himself keeper of the count and marched around with a scratched slate, gravely miscounting everything he saw. Somehow, his wrongness made the tribe take the contest more seriously, not less. A holy scorekeeper is still a scorekeeper. Gruna took the boar hunt herself. Of course she did. She was not going to let me prove anything with warriors she did not trust, so she led the hardest column personally to win it her way and shove my clever words back down my throat. I let her. I only asked one thing in return. Let me place the traps. She agreed, because she expected watching my little contraptions fail would be a victory of its own, and after the warning I had given her, I could not fault the bet. A boar hunt normally costs a goblin tribe dearly. You chase a beast that weighs more than 3 of you, with tusks that open bellies, into a corner, and you lose 1 or 2 hunters to those tusks every time, and you call the survivors heroes. I had watched armies do the same thing with people. I hate it in every language. So instead of chasing, we would let the wood do the work. I had the goblins dig covered pits along the trails where the boars already ran, and rig a deadfall of stone and log at the narrow bend where the beasts funneled. The boar does the charging. The trap does the killing. The hunters just close the door. It is beautiful on a ledger. It is harder in wet dirt with goblins who have spent their whole lives being told that a real warrior meets the tusk head on. Half of them thought the pits were cowardly. The other half kept forgetting which covered pits were ours and nearly walked into them, which is its own kind of problem. And then, because I am not perfect, and this story keeps insisting on reminding everyone of that, one of the deadfalls dropped early. I had set the trigger too light. A young goblin scout, moving up the trail to signal that the boars were coming, brushed the line, and a 1/4 ton of stone and log came down a body length behind him with a crash that shook grit from the trees. He froze. If he had been 1 step slower, the ledger would have had its first name in the loss column, and it would have been my fault, written in my own careless hand. The wood went silent. Gruna crossed to the sprung trap, looked at the crushed earth where a goblin had almost died, and then looked at me, and I braced for it. Here it comes, I thought. She peels the mask off right here, over a boy who nearly got flattened by the king's clever idea. She did not. She knelt by the trap, studied the trigger line, the angle, the trail, the way the boars had actually been moving instead of the way I had guessed they would. And then she reset it herself, 10 paces up, tighter to the bend, off the path her scouts used, exactly where the beast would be, and no goblin ever was. She did it without a word to me. She did it like a woman correcting a tool she had decided, grudgingly, was worth keeping sharp. And I understood, watching her hands work, that I had not just found a warrior. I had found the person who could take my logic and give it the one thing I could never give it myself, which was a soldier's instinct for where bodies really go. The boars came at dusk. They ran the trail exactly as Gruna had read it, into the funnel, under the reset deadfall, and the wood did the killing the way I had promised. 3 boars down, not one hunter scratched. The younger warriors stood over the kills with the confused expression of people who had won without bleeding and were not sure it counted. It counted. The crown ledger counted it for them. Boars, 3. Iron scrap from the ridge, 18 measures, 3 over target. Hunting losses, for the first time anyone could remember, and the number I had been starving for since the throne room finally moved. Authority, 80 to 140. But what I truly carried away was not in the mask. It was in the faces of the old chiefs, who had gathered to watch the soft king fail a strength test, and instead watched Gruna, the strongest warrior in the tribe, win the whole trial using the coward's traps they had spent all morning mocking. That is the thing about humbling a proud man properly. You do not deliver it yourself. You let the person they respect deliver it for you. The chiefs could sneer at me all day. They could not sneer at Gruna standing over 3 boars with all her hunters alive, holding a method that had my fingerprints all over it. And I watched something shift in the chamber that no ledger tracks. The young warriors who had wanted to fight for me now wanted to be assigned by me, because assignment was where the winning happened. Status had quietly moved from the loudest fist to the smartest column. It is a small thing, a change in who a goblin stands near when he wants to matter. But a crypt runs on that, and for the first time the standing near pointed at the man in the mask instead of straight past him. She came to me after, while the tribe butchered the kills and argued happily over the iron. She did not thank me. I would have been suspicious if she had. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough that only I heard it, and she said the truest thing anyone had said to me in that crypt. "I still do not trust you," she said. "I do not think you are a king." She let that sit, then went on. "But your traps brought my warriors home, and a method that brings my warriors home is worth more to me than a crown. So I will use you, the way you use everyone. We understand each other." War captain candidate, advanced. The mask agreed. It was not loyalty, it was something better and more durable, which is a professional who has decided your usefulness outweighs your lies. I had bought Gruna the only way she could be bought, by keeping her people breathing. I would spend the next months learning how easily that account could go into debt, because while I was learning that lesson in the wood, Bruck was learning a different one in the dark, and his was uglier. He had watched the strongest warrior in the tribe fall in behind the bookkeeper. He had watched the raid he wanted turn into a farm, and the fight he wanted turn into a chore with columns. Bruck did not have Gruna's patience or her eye. What he had was a certainty, old as the tribe itself, that humans were dangerous, and soft rules would get everyone killed. And a growing need to prove it before the whole crypt forgot what a real chief was for. I should have watched him closer. I had spent the whole day proving that measured methods beat brave stupidity, and every proof landed on Bruck like an insult with numbers attached. A humiliated man holding a certainty is more dangerous than any boar in any wood. So that night, while the tribe slept full of boar for the first time in a season, Bruck walked down to where 4 bound knights lay in the dark, and he put his rough hand on the bar of their cage, and he decided he would show this tribe how dangerous the king's precious prisoners really were. I woke to screaming, which is a bad way to learn that your rival has been busy. By the time I got the mask on my face and my feet under me, the prisoner chamber was already chaos, and chaos in a crypt moves faster than any man can run. Bruck had opened the cage. He would say later that he only loosened the bar to test them, that he wanted the tribe to see what humans do when you give them a soft rule and a slack chain. What actually happened is that 4 desperate knights found a gap and took it. They did not get far. There is nowhere to get in a hole full of goblins. But in the scramble, one knight got a hand on a dropped blade, and before anyone closed the distance, he opened a long red line across the arm of a young guard Gruna had posted. A kid barely old enough to hold a spear. The kid went down clutching his arm, blood black in the torchlight, and the sound the tribe made then was not a sound I had heard before. It was lower than anger. It was the noise a pack makes right before it stops being individuals and becomes one hungry thing. Eat them. It went up from the back and caught like fire. Eat them. Eat them. The king's soft prisoners spilled goblin blood. What did counting ever buy us? Eat them all. And I stood at the edge of it in a bone mask, and I understood I had about 10 breaths before the decision got made without me. The mask, unhelpful as ever in a crisis, flashed cold. Prisoner asset at risk, authority unstable. It was telling me what I already knew, which is that if I lost control of this room, I lost everything I had built in it, and possibly my face along with it. Gruna reached the wounded boy first, and then did the thing that saved us all, though it looked at the time like she was just being a soldier. She put her own body between the mob and the recaptured prisoners, spear level, and roared for order. And the front rank hesitated, because Gruna hesitating is a thing that gets you killed. Raga appeared at my shoulder out of the dark the way she always did, and her voice was very quiet and very fast. One wrong word here and they eat the humans, and then they eat the idea of you, she said. They do not want justice, they want blood. Give them something that looks like blood, or you are finished. 3 prisoners were back under guard, unhurt. The 4th, the one who had grabbed the blade, had taken a beating in the recapture and now sagged bleeding against the wall, worth less by the minute. 4 assets down to 3 whole and 1 spoiled, and a wounded goblin and a mob, all before I had properly woken up. And there was Bruck, at the front of it, arms spread, playing the room like a drum. See what the human rules bought us, he bellowed. Goblin blood on the floor. The king keeps meat that bites. A real chief would have fed these things to us on the first night. He was not wrong enough. That was the trouble. He was not wrong enough. Here was my problem, laid out cold. I could not let them eat the prisoners. Dead men do not tell me convoy routes. Do not trade for Lena. Do not stand as proof of anything. But I also could not defend the humans, because the moment the tribe saw their king shield the things that had just cut one of their own, the mask would slip in every mind at once. So I could not argue for the prisoners. I had to argue for the tribe, which meant I had to change the question in that room before the room answered it. Stop! I did not shout it. I have learned that shouting into a mob just adds your voice to theirs. I said it flat and cold and let the mask carry the weight, and I stepped into the middle of the floor where the wounded boy lay, and I knelt by him instead of by the prisoners, and that single choice bought me 3 more breaths. You want blood for this? I said, looking around the chamber slowly. Good, so do I. A goblin bled on my floor tonight, and someone is going to answer for it. But I am the king, and a king does not let the pack decide who is guilty by who is closest to their teeth. That is not justice. That is just a second wound. I could feel Raga go still behind me, because she knew what I was doing before I fully knew it myself. I was not going to stop the trial. I was going to hold one. And I was going to point it, very carefully, at the person who actually opened that cage. We will have a judgment, I said. The old way. The king's judgment, the way the first kings did it, by testimony and by count, not by whoever is hungriest. And whoever endangered this tribe tonight, human or goblin, will pay in front of all of you. That is my word. Anyone who eats before the judgment is stealing my justice from my mouth. I had no idea if the first kings had ever held a judgment. I doubt it. But Rogs did not blink. She lifted her staff and named it a true right, the judgment of the returned king, older than the crypt, and the invented law settled over the room with the weight of something ancient because a shaman said the words and a mask glowed behind them. The crown ledger, catching up to my mouth, wrote a new line I had not asked for. Royal trial function unlocked. The mob did not disperse. Mobs never just disperse, but it changed shape, from a thing about to feed into a thing waiting to watch. And that change of shape was the whole victory. Gruna felt the pressure ease against her spear and shot me a look that said we would talk about this later. I set it up fast because a held breath does not hold forever. 3 prisoners to one side under Gruna. The wounded knight propped where everyone could see he was hurt too, so this looked like weighing and not like coddling. And Thomas, the young one who talked to survive, called forward first because I already suspected he knew exactly how that bar had come loose. Here's the trick to running a trial you have secretly rigged. You do not tell people the answer. You ask the questions in an order that lets them find it, so the verdict feels like theirs. I asked Thomas simple things. Was the cage locked at nightfall? Yes. Did the prisoners have a blade before the escape? No. Then how, I asked, does a locked cage open itself in a crypt full of guards? Thomas was not noble. I want to be clear about that, because it would be a nicer story if he were. He looked at the mob, and he looked at Bruck, and he did the arithmetic that keeps a captured man breathing, and he chose the answer that put the danger onto someone other than himself. Someone lifted the bar from the outside, he said. The big one, the chief with the scar. The chamber turned, not toward me, toward Bruck. And I watched the exact moment his own weapon came around in his hand, because the wound he had wanted to blame on my soft rules was suddenly a wound he had personally uncaged. The proof he had staged to break me had my fingerprints nowhere on it and his all over it. Bruck did what cornered men do. He roared that the human lied, that a prisoner would say anything, that this was more of the king's bookkeeper tricks. And it might have worked, except I did not rest the verdict on Thomas alone. I never rest anything on one column. I turned to the guards Bruck had sent away from their post earlier that evening, and I asked them, by name, who told them to leave. They did not want to answer, but a goblin who lies in the judgment of the returned king, Raga intoned, feeds the earth early, and between her voice and the mask and the count that did not lie, they gave him up. Bruck had cleared the guards. Bruck had loosened the bar. Bruck had built the escape and then tried to sell me the wreckage as proof of my weakness. The mob that had come to eat my prisoners now wanted to eat my chief, and that was a different and more dangerous problem, because Bruck was not an asset. He was a chief with a faction, and a faction with a martyr is how a tribe splits down the middle. Killing him would be easy. Killing him would be popular. Killing him would hand his followers a grievance they would carry into every future fight. So I did not kill him. I made him useful, which he would hate far more. Bruck, I said, over the noise. You believe the store is a soft thing that steals a warrior's strength. You believe the king's rules make us weak. Fine, then you will guard them. From tonight, you are store guard, under War Captain Gruna, answerable for every mark of food this tribe holds. The chamber went quiet in a way that was almost funny. I let it land. Every ration that goes missing, I said, is now your failure first. Every mouth that goes hungry is your watch. You wanted to prove the store does not matter. Now the whole tribe eats or starves by how well you keep it. Prove me wrong by doing it well. The Crown Ledger approved before Bruck could find his voice. Edict confirmed. Bruck, store guard, under War Captain, and the number I'd bled for all night finally climbed. Authority 140 to 220, because I had turned a riot into a law and a rival into a post without spilling a drop I could not afford. Bruck was not grateful. Let me kill that idea now. He stared at me with a hatred that had gotten colder and more patient, which is worse than the hot kind, and he took the store key from Gruna's hand like it was a live coal. A man like Bruck does not forgive being made useful. He files it, but he took the post, because refusing it in front of the tribe would have finished him, and we both knew it. Gruna watched the whole thing with the flat professional attention of someone updating an estimate. Later, she told me she still did not like it, that a chained wolf is still a wolf. But she also said that giving Bruck the store put him under her command, and she would take a wolf she could watch over a wolf in the dark any night. Her arc and mine were braiding together whether either of us trusted it. I thought that was the end of the night. It was not, because Thomas was not finished bargaining. He had bought his life with Bruck's name, and now he tried to buy something better, a place worth keeping, by offering the one coin I could not resist. He told me that in 2 dawns, a supply convoy would pass the lower road. Varric's convoy. Iron and salt, lightly guarded, riding fat on the assumption that no one out here was organized enough to take it. Iron. Salt. Varric's own stolen goods rolling past my door while my forge had nothing and my food had no way to keep. The mask marked it cold. Convoy route acquired, window 2 dawns. Salt is not a spice to a tribe living in a hole. Salt is how meat lasts past the day you kill it, how a store stops being a countdown, how 5 days of food quietly becomes 15. Iron is not only weapons, iron is tools and hinges and blades, the difference between scraping stone and building something that holds. One convoy carried the answer to 2 of my worst columns at once, and it belonged to the man who had taken my wife and called me a rat. Some deals are too clean to refuse. Before I let myself want it too much, I went and knelt by the wounded boy again, where Nara had wrapped his arm in clean cloth. He looked up at the mask, and he was not afraid of it. He asked in a small voice whether the chief who let the humans loose would be punished. I told him the chief was going to guard the tribe's food now, for the rest of his life if I had my way. The boy thought about that with the seriousness only a child brings to justice, then nodded, satisfied. That nod was worth more to me than any number in the mask. A crowd forgets by morning. That boy would remember for years that his king counted his blood as a debt and made someone pay it without eating anyone. Loyalty is built out of that kind of remembering. I looked at Bruck holding the store key like a grudge, and at 3 whole prisoners worth more alive than any meal, and I understood I had survived the night by inventing a law I would now have to keep forever. And I had 2 dawns to turn a stolen convoy into the first real iron of a kingdom that did not yet know it was one. 2 dawns is not much time to plan a robbery, especially when your entire crew has never, in its collective life, done a single thing quietly. Goblins do not sneak up on anything. Goblins arrive. But the trial had left the tribe hungry in a new way, hungry to prove the returned king could win them more than mushrooms. And the chiefs came to me with a simple, terrible idea. Raid the village. We were fed, we were armed with boar confidence, and there was a fat little valley 2 ridges over with grain and pigs and a fence a toddler could vault. Bruck did not even suggest it, which told me he had learned something. It was the other two chiefs, drunk on winning, who wanted blood that came cheap. I let them finish, and then I put the true numbers on the floor, because numbers are the only sermon I know how to give. That village, I said, holds 1 day of food for a tribe this size. 1 day. And in exchange for that 1 day, we get burned farms, screaming farmers, riders to the garrison, and Varric riding back here with a reason and a road. Then I opened the thing the mask had been sharpening since Thomas talked. Enemy logistics view. The blue light unrolled the lower road across my vision, the convoy on it, the guard count, the pace, the gap where the escort thinned at the narrow cut. Not a village of frightened farmers. A supply train, iron and salt and tools, belonging to the exact thief who had framed me and stolen my wife. We are not going to rob farmers, I told them. We are going to rob the thief who already robbed them. Varric has been selling this army's own supplies for years. That convoy is stolen twice over. I am going to steal it a third time, and I am going to enjoy it. The chamber liked that. I felt it land, the specific pleasure of a target that is both richer and more deserved. Even Crick understood it and announced to everyone that the king was about to become the thief who steals from thieves, which was, for once, exactly right. And I let him keep the phrase because it was better than anything I had. Gruna was not so easily pleased. She found me while I was drawing the road in spilled ash and asked the question a war captain is supposed to ask. You keep choosing the harder target to avoid the easy blood, she said. At some point, that stops being clever and starts being weakness. Which is this? It was a fair question, and I gave her a fair answer. This is not mercy, I said. A burned village sends 50 riders in a grudge. A robbed convoy sends one confused knight who cannot even admit out loud what he was carrying. I am not sparing the farmers because I am kind. I am sparing them because dead farmers cost more than they are worth. Mercy that pays is just good accounting. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she almost smiled, which on Gruna is a terrifying thing to witness. Fine, she said. Show me a robbery that keeps my warriors breathing, and I will call it whatever you like. But if goblins could do this quietly, we would already be rich. We are loud. That is the whole problem. She was right, and that was the deeper bottleneck. Worse than any guard count. Goblins are many things, and every one of them is loud. Our entire plan lived or died on a crew of creatures who cheer when they are excited and shriek when they are scared, holding still and silent in the dark while armed men rode past close enough to touch. So I built the plan around the noise instead of against it. Raga would walk the ridge before dawn, laying her smoke rites. The pale ritual smolder the tribe already believed in, which happened to also blur shapes and muffle the edges of a road at first light. Faith and cover in the same smoke. I have never been above using a real superstition to hide a real ambush. Gruna drilled the warriors on one thing only, not fighting, waiting. Hold until the king drops the signal, and not one breath before. It went badly. It kept going badly. Right up until the last rehearsal it went badly, and I went to sleep the night before the robbery knowing that our whole clever operation rested on the least reliable virtue my tribe possessed. The convoy came up the lower road at gray first light, exactly as Thomas had sold it. 4 wagons, a dozen guards riding easy, the whole train fat and slow, and certain that nothing out here was organized enough to be a threat. That certainty was the most valuable thing they carried, and they did not even know they had it. A guard who is sure he is safe is already half beaten before the first stone ever falls. I lay in the smoke above the narrow cut with Gruna beside me and the whole tribe strung along the ridge, and I watched the lead wagon roll into the funnel where the road pinched between 2 banks. This was the spot. Drop the deadfall behind the last wagon, seal the cut, and take the train trapped in the throat of the road with barely a blow struck. And then a young warrior on the far bank, too eager, too full of bore and glory, moved too soon. I do not even know what he was trying to do. Get a better angle maybe, be first. Whatever it was, he broke the skyline, and a horse saw him, and the horse screamed and reared, and the whole front of the convoy went from easy to alert in the space of a single equine heartbeat. Guards' hands went to hilts, heads turned toward the banks. The certainty I'd been counting on evaporated. Plan stability falling, the mask reported, as if I needed telling. The clean version was dead. The version where we took a sleepy convoy in the dark was gone, and what remained was a dozen awake, armored, professional soldiers against goblins whose great just shrieked at a horse. Every instinct in that ridge wanted to charge. I could feel it building, the tribe's whole nature straining toward the one thing that would get half of them killed, a screaming rush into drawn steel. Gruna's warriors coiled. One word, one wrong second, and my clever robbery became a pile of my own dead. So I changed the target, fast, out loud, to Gruna, the way you can only do with someone who has decided your logic is worth trusting. Not the guards, I said. The wagons. Break the road, break the wheels, take the cargo, leave them in their lives and their confusion. We are not here to win a fight. We are here to steal a shipment. Gruna did not argue. That was the whole payoff of the boar hunt, cashed in one instant. She understood before I finished, and she turned her held rush into a redirected one. Warriors peeling off the suicidal charge and onto the wagons and the road itself. Exactly where the guards were not looking, because who attacks a road? We dropped the deadfall anyway, not behind the convoy, but under it, into the pinch of the cut. So the banked earth gave way, and the narrow road simply stopped being a road. The lead wagon's front wheels went into the collapse, and the axle snapped with a crack like a breaking mast. The wagon behind it slewed and tipped. Salt and iron spilled into the churn. The guards braced for a wave of screaming green bodies to cut down. That is what they had trained for. That is what goblins do. Instead, the ground opened under their supply train, and their wagons folded, and shapes moved in the smoke, grabbing crates and vanishing, and there was nothing to swing a sword at. You cannot cavalry charge a collapsed road. You cannot behead an idea. We stripped the two stalled wagons in the time it took the escort to organize a defense against an attack that was not coming. Then, Raga's smoke thickened on my signal, and the tribe melted off the ridge with its arms full, and by the time the guards realized the robbers had already left, we were gone into the dark, with the cut behind us blocked by their own ruined wagons. Casualties, the mask wrote, 0. But under it, smaller and colder, a line I did not love. It said, in effect, that the enemy had now seen goblins behave in a way goblins do not behave. Varric was going to come back to a robbed convoy and a collapsed road and no bodies. And even a man as stupid with contempt as Varric would eventually have to ask who taught the animals to think. That was tomorrow's problem. Today's reward was waiting to be counted, and I have never in my life enjoyed a count more. Back in the crypt, we laid it all out on the stone, and I ran the royal inventory over the hall, and the numbers climbed like they were trying to make up for every thin winter I had ever tallied. Iron scrap, from 18 measures to 92. Salt, from nothing to 2 full bags. Tools, 9 good ones, real ones. Hammers and files and pry bars a tribe could build with. Forge material secured, the mask confirmed, and then the line I had been chasing since the throne room climbed hard. Authority, 220 to 360. But the number was not the part that stayed with me. It was Graham. The old half-blind smith knelt over the iron and ran his clouded fingers across it, piece by piece, the way a starving man handles bread. He had been telling me for weeks in his quiet way that a king who could not arm his tribe was no king. Now there was iron under his hands, real iron, enough to matter, and he did not say anything because Graham never did. He started sorting it by weight, which from Graham was a coronation. I brought Bruck to the salt myself because the lesson was too good to waste. 2 bags, I told him. This is how your store stops being a countdown. Salt keeps meat. Keep the meat, and 5 days of food becomes 15. You wanted to prove the store did not matter. Guard this well, and you will feed the tribe through a winter no raid could have bought. He hated me for it. He also, I noticed, guarded the salt like his own children. Gruna said the only thing she needed to say, which was nothing about me at all. She counted her warriors, found all of them, and let out a breath. A robbery with a full haul and every fighter home is a thing that had never happened in that tribe's memory, and she knew exactly who had made it possible, and she was never going to say so out loud, and she did not have to. It was in the last wagon that the night turned. Under the iron and the salt sat a smaller crate, packed careful, marked with a sigil I did not know, full of healer's goods. Clean cloth, dried herbs, small stoppered jars. Supplies moving from a healer tower to somewhere they were needed, which meant somewhere there was money and control. I passed the herbs in the small jars to Nara for the sick, because a king who steals medicine and hoards it is just a smaller baron. Nara took them like they were made of glass. Her boy was mending on mushroom broth, but mending slow, and dried healer's herbs were a thing she had never once held in her life. I told myself the crate was only loot. Her face, bent over those jars, told me it was more than that. It was only when the jars were safe in her hands that I noticed the last thing left in the crate, folded on top, the one piece I had very nearly passed over without a second look. A strip of cloth, torn from a healer's apron, stained brown at one edge with old blood. Small, easy to miss. The kind of thing only a person already looking for a message would ever look at twice, and worked into the corner in small, neat stitches. The way a careful woman marks her own things so they come back to her was a pattern I had watched her sew 100 evenings by our fire. Lena's mark, Lena's hand, Lena's blood maybe, dried at the edge. I did not move for a moment. The whole crypt kept going around me, the counting and the sorting, and Crick narrating my legend. And I stood there, holding a piece of my wife that had traveled here inside the goods of the men who had taken her. The cloth carried a second mark under hers, stamped into the weave, the sigil from the crate. The healer tower. Odrin's healer tower. She was alive enough 3 days ago to bleed on her own apron and tear a strip of it, and she had marked it and slipped it into a shipment because Lena is smarter than everyone who has ever underestimated her, and she was sending me a map the only way a prisoner can. 2 ridges away, at that same hour, Varric would be sitting his horse at the ruin of his convoy, staring at a collapsed road and a pile of splintered wagons and no goblin bodies to explain it. He would tell himself it was a freak cave-in. He would tell himself animals got lucky. Men like Varric can tell themselves almost anything to avoid the sentence that the rat they never bothered to kill had learned to build. I folded the bloody cloth and put it inside my shirt against my chest, where the mask could not see it and the tribe could not read my face. Then I made myself do the coldest arithmetic of my life, which was to not run, because I finally had a thread to Lena, a real one, stitched in her own hand, and it led straight to a baron's tower I could not yet touch. The salt would keep. The iron would become weapons. And the man who held my wife had just, without knowing it, delivered me proof that she was alive, and exactly the reason I now had to build faster than any fake king had ever built. I kept my rage where I keep everything that matters. In a column, waiting, counting down. I had a plan for Lena. I had it half drawn in ash the very next morning, routes and timings, and what I would need to reach a healer tower, and I let myself believe for 1 whole hour that the hardest part was behind me. Then the crypt started to get sick, and the crypt does not care about my plans, my timing, or the map I had folded so carefully against my chest. It began the way these things always begin, quietly, with the wrong smell and too many people crouched in the dark corners. By midday, one of Bruck's store guards could not stand. By evening, the count was 7. By the second morning, the mask put a number on it that I had been dreading since I first smelled it. Sick, 17. Disease spread, rising. A crowded hole, shared water from a standing pool, bodies packed warm against the cold, and no rule anywhere about where the waste went. Because when has a hungry tribe ever had the luxury of caring? It was not a curse. It was arithmetic, the ugly kind, the kind that doubles while you sleep. The Crown Ledger offered me a locked door. Clinic seed, it said, and then, unavailable until remedy. The system would let me build a place to heal, but only after I proved I could actually heal something, which was the mask's polite way of telling me that wanting to help is not the same as knowing how. And here was the trap that mattered. Worse than any convoy, Lena was 3 days out, alive, waiting, and I finally knew where. Every hour I spent on the sick was an hour she stayed in Odran's tower. Every instinct I had as a husband screamed to leave the goblins to their fever and go get my wife while the thread was still warm. Then Nara found me. She carried her boy in her arms, the same boy who had kept down his first spoonful of broth, and he was hot again, hotter than before, gone loose and gray the way children go when the fever has decided something. She did not beg with words. She held him out toward the mask, toward the king who had put him at the top of a list once, and let me look at what my choice would cost if I made the wrong one. I have never hated being right more than I did in that moment, because the math was not close. If I left for Lena, the fever took the boy and a dozen others while I was gone, and I would come back a king to a graveyard, and Lena, when I finally reached her, would look at what I had let die to save her and know exactly the kind of man she had married. So, I stayed. I put the ash plan for Lena away, unfinished, against my chest next to the bloody cloth, and I made myself say the sentence out loud to Nara so the tribe would hear it. The king does not leave while his people are dying, not for anything. It was true, and it was a lie, because part of me was walking out that door the whole time, and I did not let my feet follow. Raga watched me choose. She always watched me choose. That was half of what she was for. And when I told her I needed someone who understood sickness better than I did, she did not soften it. She said she knew where such a person lived, but that I should understand this delay was mine to carry. That the boy and the 17 and whatever came next were the price of the crown I had picked up in her crypt. Then she told me about Miva, an alchemist, a swamp witch the tribe would say, spitting to the side to keep the bad luck off their own teeth. Exiled years ago for reasons Raga did not fully explain, living alone in the bog at the edge of the old goblin lands, brewing things that healed and things that very much did not. If anyone could turn my half-remembered clerk knowledge into medicine, it was her. There was, Raga added, one problem. Miva did not like visitors, did not like goblins, did not like kings, and had a strong professional habit of testing whether the people who came to her door were worth the air they breathed. Some of them, Raga said, did not leave. She may help you. She may poison you to watch what you do. With Miva, those are frequently the same appointment. The bog was a gray, wet nightmare that grabbed at your boots and smelled like the inside of a fever. Miva's hut sat on stilts over black water, hung with drying things I chose not to identify, and she was waiting in the doorway when we arrived, because of course she was. She had watched us struggle through her swamp for an hour and let us do it. She was tall and lean and unbothered, with the flat, unimpressed stare of a person who has already decided you are wasting her time. She looked at the mask, and she looked at my human hands, which she clocked in about 1 second, and she smiled in a way I did not like at all. "A Goblin King with a man's hands," she said. "How novel. Come in, little fraud. You look thirsty after all that walking." And she offered me a cup of something warm, and Raga went very still beside me, and I understood that the test had already started, and the first question was whether I was stupid enough to drink. I drank it, not because I trusted her, because refusing would have ended the conversation, and I needed her more than I needed to be safe. Also, and I want to be honest, because I've never been good at saying no to someone who is clearly smarter than the room expects them to be. It hit within minutes, not enough to kill, enough to make the floor tilt and my stomach clench, and cold sweat break across the back of my neck. Poison severity, moderate, the mask reported, with no cure window offered, only a scatter of cold hints. Charcoal, milk, water. The system was not going to save me. It was going to grade me. Miva sat back to enjoy the show. This is the part she liked, I would learn. The part where the fraud panics and prays to his mask, or accuses her of witchcraft, or simply falls down. Crick, who had followed us in, made a sound of pure horror and looked ready to worship or attack, unclear which. I did not have the strength to be kingly, so I gave up on it. I got down on her floor, which was undignified, and I asked her, thick-tongued, for 3 things. Charred wood, ground fine, any milk she had, and clean water, as much as she could spare. She raised one eyebrow, and, curious now, brought them. I ate the charcoal, because charcoal grabs poison and holds it before your gut can drink it in. A thing I had learned the hard way, keeping soldiers alive after they drank from the wrong stream. I followed it with milk to line my stomach, and water to thin whatever was left. And then I sat on a swamp witch's floor and waited to find out whether my own knowledge was going to save me or make me look like an idiot as I died. It saved me. The tilt in the floor slowed, the cramp loosened. I stayed sick for an hour, but I stayed alive. And I did it with charred wood and milk instead of magic. And when I finally lifted my head, Miva was looking at me completely differently. "You are not a mage," she said, and it was not an accusation now. It was a diagnosis. Mages do not know what charcoal does. Mages pray. You reach for materials. She crouched to my level, studying me like a specimen that had just done something interesting. "What are you?" "Under the dead man's face." "A quartermaster," I told her, because I was too nauseous to lie. "I keep soldiers alive so they can go die usefully later. I know what spoils water and what cleans it, what stops a wound rotting and what makes it worse. I do not have magic. I have a very good memory for what kills people slowly." Miva laughed, a real one, sharp and surprised. Then she stopped laughing and got practical, because underneath the cruelty she was, above all things, a person who could not resist a real problem. "Tell me about your sickness," she said. "The 17. And I did, and she nodded along, and by the end, she was already reaching for jars, because I had described her favorite kind of enemy, the kind that lives in dirty water and dies to soap. She taught me what I already half knew and had been too slow to act on. The fever was riding the water and the hands. Clean both and it starved. So we needed 3 things fast, and I knew the shapes of all of them and none of the exact recipes, which is exactly the gap Miva is for. Filters, first. Charcoal and sand and cloth in layers, so the standing water came out the bottom clean enough to boil. Smoke, second, the harsh kind that drives the small biting things out of the sleeping chambers. And soap, the true prize, because hands that carry the sickness from the sick to the well are the fastest road the fever has, and soap closes that road. I rushed the soap. Of course I rushed it. I had 17 sick and a boy going gray and a wife in a tower, and patience is the first thing I lose when the count is against me. I burned the ash to lie, mixed it hot and heavy and strong, wanting it to work now, and I made the exact mistake a hurrying man makes with caustic things. The first cake of soap I made took the skin off the hand of the goblin who tested it. Not badly, but enough. A red raw burn, a yelp, and every watching goblin taking one large step back from the king who had promised medicine and delivered acid. I felt the trust I had spent weeks building wobble on the edge of the exact trap I had been so careful about everywhere else. The trap of a king who promises help and hands you harm instead. Miva did not gloat, which surprised me. She took the ruined batch, sniffed it, and told me flatly what I had done. Too much lye, not enough fat. No time to cure. You made a weapon and called it a cleaner. She said it the way a master says it to an apprentice who is almost worth teaching. Then she showed me the fix. More fat, rendered from the boar we had saved. Less lye, and slaked, gentled, the harsh edge fed with the swamp's own softening agents that she measured by eye and instinct. Things I could never have known, and she could never have forgotten. She made me remake it with her hands guiding the ratio, and the second cake came out pale and mild, and did not burn the second goblin who touched it. Alchemy unit slot, the mask wrote, unlocked. Not because Miva liked me, because Miva had, in the space of an afternoon, decided that a king who could be corrected and would remake his own mistake with his own hands was a better investment than any grateful fool who bowed. She was not joining me. She was, in her words, going to keep me from poisoning my own tribe by accident, which for Miva was practically a marriage vow. Miva worked beside me the whole time after that, insulting my knots and my ratios and my face, correcting each without ever once being warm about it. I have had gentler teachers. I have never had a better one, because shame is the finest ink there is for writing a lesson down. We went to work in earnest then, and the science was not a lecture, it was a race. 6 filters built and running, the standing water coming out clear enough to boil down to safe. 12 harsh smoke bundles made from her bog reeds, choking the biting things out of the sleeping dark. And soap, real soap now. Cake after pale cake, moving hand to hand through the tribe with a rule attached that I made Raga bless so it would stick. Wash before the sick, wash after, every time. It was not a miracle, and I will not pretend it was one. Sickness does not break in a day, but by the 3rd day, the mask moved the number I cared about most, sick, 17 to 9, and disease risk down by nearly half, and the doubling that had been eating my tribe, finally, slowly, reversed. The receipt that mattered was Nara's boy. On the 4th morning, the fever let him go. He woke cool and cross and hungry, complaining loudly, which is the most beautiful thing a sick child can possibly do. Nara pressed her forehead to his and did not look at me at all, which was exactly right, because it meant she had stopped being afraid enough to remember I was even in the room. And then something happened that no ledger had a column for. When one of the old chiefs muttered that the king had nearly burned a goblin's hand off with his witch soap, Raga turned on him in front of everyone and defended me, not as a useful fraud, not for the tribe's sake. She said the king had made a mistake and then knelt in a swamp and corrected it with his own hands, and that this, not perfection, was what a real king was made of. It was the first time Raga had defended me because she wanted to, and not because my death would inconvenience her, and I felt that shift more than I felt the authority climb from 360 to 520. A conditional ally had just, for one sentence, stopped being conditional. I let myself have that one good evening. The sick were mending, the water was clean, Miva was insulting my technique from the corner in a way that meant she was staying, and the boy was eating. For one evening, the crypt felt less like a hole I was hiding in and more like a place I was actually building, which is a dangerous thing to let yourself feel. Far off, though I did not know it yet, Varric had finally swallowed enough of his pride to move. A robbed convoy he could explain. A collapsed road he could blame on soft ground. But a second report of goblins who filtered their water and washed their hands was a thing even his contempt could not choke down, and it frightened him at last into marching. Then Gruna came down from the ridge watch with mud on her spear and her jaw set hard, and she did not have to say it, but she said it anyway, low, so only I would hear before the tribe did. Varric is coming, she said. Not a convoy this time, a column. Armed and angry and headed straight for us. And we are still half sick, and he knows exactly where the rat went to ground. Varric brought 30 knights to kill a rat. That was the number Gruna's scouts counted on the road, and it told me 2 useful things. It told me he was finally afraid, and it told me he had no idea what he was actually walking into, because 30 is a lot for a fugitive and nowhere near enough for a fortress. The trouble was that we were not a fortress yet. We were a hole with sick goblins in it, and Bruck wanted to fix that the only way he knew how, which was to march everyone out onto open ground and meet steel with teeth. We are strong now, Bruck said, and he was not entirely wrong. We have iron, we have boar in our bellies. We have warriors who have tasted winning. Let us go up there and show the humans what a real tribe does. Half the chamber growled agreement. It was the most dangerous idea I had heard since the mass. Because on open ground, 30 armored knights on trained horses turn 100 goblins into a story people tell about the year the tribe died. I had watched it happen to better armed men than us. Courage is not a wall. Courage is just how fast the brave ones reach the front to die first. So I said no, again, and this time I did not soften it. We are not going out there, I told them. We are going to make them come in here. And then I said the thing I actually believed, the thing that had been forming since the first night I fell down those stairs into the dark. We are not stronger than them, I said. We will never be stronger than them. But up there, they are strong. Down here, we are home. And a home that knows every crack and every shadow eats stronger men than us for breakfast. Let me show you how a crypt digests an army. I do not know where the confidence came from. Panic, probably, reshaped into something that sounded like a plan. But it landed. Even Bruck went quiet, because there is a kind of certainty that hungry, frightened people will follow because it is the only certainty in the room, and I had learned to manufacture it on demand. Then we went to work, turning a tomb into a trap, and the Crown Ledger, which loves nothing more than a project, opened 3 functions at once. Fortification plan, trap corridor, smoke vent network. I had a system that spoke my language, which is the language of things arranged on purpose. The crypt was a maze already. All I did was lie about which parts of it were real. We built false doors, 6 of them, heavy and important looking, opening onto dead ends and drop pits and blank stone. A night in the dark trusts a door. A door is how you get out. That trust was going to be the most expensive thing they carried. We opened smoke vents, 4 of them, cut into the old shafts I had reopened for the mushrooms, so Miva's harsh bog smoke could be pushed room to room on command, blinding and choking and hurting. And we marked 3 collapse points, corridors rigged to come down on a signal, walls I could turn into dead ends behind an enemy who thought he was advancing. Everyone got a place. Gruna took the fighters, positioned not to win a battle, but to close doors and pinch retreats, to be the walls of the maze that moved. Miva took the smoke, crouched at the vents with her reeds and a slow smile, because for once someone wanted her poisons pointed at an enemy. Raga took the thing I could not fake, the voice, the right, the towering image of a returned king whose crypt itself rose up to defend him. And Crick took the signs. This was my mistake, though it made sense at the time. Crick knew every corner of the crypt, so I made him keeper of the door marks, the one who chalked which doors were real and which were false, so our own goblins would not die in our own trap. I did not account for the fact that Crick was Crick, that a creature who narrates my legend wrong every single day of his life might also, under real pressure, chalk a door exactly backward. We were as ready as a half-sick tribe in a hole can be when Varric's torches came down the graveyard slope at dusk. 30 knights dismounted at the mausoleum mouth. My old tormentor stood at the top of the stairs and shouted into the dark that he had come for the traitor Kael and that he would burn the vermin out of their hole. "Come in then," I whispered, from behind the mask, from the deep dark where the returned king waited. "Please, come in." They came in. Of course, they came in. Contempt walks a man through a door his fear should have warned him about. The knights formed up and pushed down into the crypt in a tight, bright column. Torches high, blades out, exactly the disciplined wedge that wins on open ground and means nothing at all in a maze that hates you. We let the front ranks get deep before we touch them. That is the whole art of it. You do not stop an army at the door. You swallow it, let it commit, let it stretch out thin and blind along corridors that all look the same, and then you start closing the doors it came in through. The first collapse dropped behind their lead group on my signal. A corridor of stone came down between the knights in front and the knights behind. Just like that, the disciplined column was 2 smaller, frightened, disconnected pieces, each certain the other was already being slaughtered in the dark. Knight formation. Broken, the mask noted. It had barely started. Miva opened her vents. Harsh gray smoke poured into the forward chambers, and the knights did what men in smoke always do, which is head for the nearest door. Because a door is safety, a door is out. Except the doors near them were the false ones. 6 heavy, honest-looking lies opening onto pits and dead stone. And men in armor began to funnel exactly where I wanted them, thinking they were escaping. For a few minutes it was going perfectly, which should have warned me, because in my experience, a plan that runs perfectly clean is a plan that is about to introduce you to the part you forgot. Because Crick, somewhere in the chaos, in his excitement, in his absolute certainty that he was helping, had chalked one of our real passages as false. A safe way out, marked as a dead lie. And a squad of Gruna's own fighters, falling back the way the marks told them was clear, hit the corridor Crick had mismarked, exactly as I triggered the second collapse on the enemy beside it. The stone came down, and it did not care whose side anyone was on. When the dust cleared, a whole squad of my goblins was cut off on the wrong side of a fresh wall of rubble, trapped in a smoke-filling chamber with a knot of disconnected knights. The disaster I had spent all night so proud of avoiding was suddenly happening in my own house, with my own people on the wrong side of my own wall. Goblin squad, cut off, the mask reported, and then it wrote the line I had never once wanted to see. Authority pending on casualties. My cleverness had a bill, and it had just come due in the worst possible currency. The system was telling me, coldly, that everything I had gained tonight could reverse in the next 5 minutes if my cleverness got my own tribe killed. I did not hide it, and I did not freeze, because freezing is how the second wall comes down. I called for Gruna, and Gruna was already moving because a war captain worth the name does not wait for the king to notice the thing she noticed first. There was an old crawl space, a burial channel too low for a knight in armor to use, that ran behind the collapsed corridor. Gruna knew it because Gruna knew the crypt the way she knew everything that could kill or save her warriors, by walking it in the dark until it lived in her hands. She took a handful of fighters into that crawl space on her belly, while I bought her time the only way I had left. I had Miva flood the cutoff chamber with smoke, not to blind our own goblins, who knew to drop low and breathe the clear air near the floor, but to blind the knights trapped with them and to Horde. Because smoke does not just choke. Smoke, pushed right, is a hand. It pushed the disoriented knights away from my trap squad and toward the sound of the collapse, toward the dead ends, while my goblins pressed flat and let the gray river flow over them. The knights thought the goblins had panicked and scattered. That was the beautiful part, the part I would have enjoyed if my heart had not been in my throat. They saw green shapes drop and vanish into smoke and thought they were winning, thought the animals had broken. And then Gruna came up out of the burial channel behind them with her fighters, and the trapped squad rose up out of the smoke in front of them, and the knights understood all at once that the smoke had not scattered anyone. The smoke had been arranging them. We got every one of my goblins out of that chamber alive. Every one. It cost 7 of Miva's 12 smoke bundles and 3 years off my life, but the loss column stayed empty, and when the mask finally updated, it did not say casualties. It said night formation collapsed. It said the maze had held. After that, it stopped being a battle and became a harvest. Miva came out of her smoke black-streaked and coughing, and pleased with herself in a way I had never seen, a woman whose poisons had finally been aimed at something that deserved them. Gruna came up out of the burial channel, filthy and counting heads. When her count came back whole, she let herself look, for 1 second, almost proud. My unit did not just survive that night. In front of the entire tribe, they won it together, each of them doing the one thing that only they could do. Blind, choking, split into terrified knots, funneled through false doors into dead ends. The knights of the Great Column stopped fighting an enemy and started simply trying to survive a building. And a knight who is only trying to get out is a knight you can take alive, which was the entire point, because dead men in armor are just heavy. Live men in armor are 11 prisoners, 7 suits of steel, and 14 good blades. Varric did not stay for the harvest. I want that remembered. The moment the tide turned, the moment his disciplined column became a panicking crowd lost in the smoke, my old tormentor did the thing that men like Varric always do when the account finally comes due. He ran. He left his knights choking in my corridors, and he clawed his way back up those broken stairs and out into the graveyard and away, abandoning 30 men to save 1 coward. His men did not run because they could not. They knelt. In the settling smoke, in the ruin of their bright column, 11 knights laid down their steel and went to their knees before a masked figure they had marched in to burn. And the goblins they had come to exterminate stood over them, alive, disciplined, and entirely unbeaten. The Crown Ledger sang, I have no better word for it. Captured knights, plus 11. Armor sets, plus 7. Steel weapons, plus 14. Fortified crypt, level 1. And then the line that changed what I was. The one I felt in my chest before I read it. Status, Fake King, to Cave Chief. Authority, 520 to 900. Raga took that moment and made it a legend before the smoke had even cleared. She lifted her staff over the kneeling knights and told the tribe, in the old cadence, that the crypt itself had risen to defend its returned king, that the stone had eaten his enemies, that no army of men could take what the earth had chosen to protect. Half of it was smoke and traps and Gruna crawling through a grave on her belly. All of it was true enough now to hold, which is the only kind of true a legend has ever needed to be. By morning, Graham had the captured steel laid out in his forge corner like a feast. 14 blades of real soldier steel, 7 suits of plate to be cut down and refitted to goblin frames. The old smith ran his hands across the metal, and for the first time since I had known him, he smiled. A small, terrible thing, all gaps and quiet satisfaction. We had gone from a tribe that fought with sharpened stone to a tribe holding human steel, all in a single night, and every warrior who took a blade from Graham's hands stood a little straighter for the weight of it. Bruck came to me while the arming went on. He did not take back a word about wanting the open battle, but he looked at the kneeling prisoners and at the rubble where 30 knights should have overrun us, and he said one word, flat and unwilling, home. Then he went back to guarding the store without another word, and from a creature like Bruck, that single grudging syllable was a banner raised over the whole night. I found Crick afterward, sitting very small against a wall, understanding for once what his mismarked door had almost cost. I did not shout at him. A king who screams at the loyal for one honest mistake teaches everyone to hide the next one. I told him he had marked one door wrong and that we would check the marks together from now on, twice, and he wept with relief and swore to worship the marks properly, and I let him, because I needed him whole more than I needed him sorry. I should have let myself enjoy it longer. We had turned a hole into a fortress, an army into prisoners, and a fake king into a cave chief, all in one night, without burying a single one of our own. It was the largest thing I had ever built, and for about an hour, it felt like the ceiling of what could go wrong had finally lifted. But Varric had run for a reason, and it was not just cowardice. A coward who flees a battle goes home to hide. Varric did not go home to hide. He rode straight for the one man who could turn my victory into my death sentence, and he carried with him a single sentence more dangerous than all 30 of his knights. Somewhere on that dark road, spurring a lathered horse toward a stone tower, Varric was rehearsing how he would say it to Baron Odrin. Not that goblins had beaten him. Goblins were an embarrassment, not a threat. He would say the other thing, the true thing, the thing that changed everything, that the goblins had not fought like goblins at all. That someone was giving them orders, that a man commanded the horde in the crypt, and the man wore a mask, and the man was almost certainly the clerk they had never bothered to make sure was dead. And in his tower, with my wife locked somewhere in his walls, Baron Odrin was about to stop thinking of me as a rumor and start thinking of me as a problem worth solving with the full weight of everything he owned. Morning did not so much arrive as get shoved through the tunnel mouth by Gruna's scouts, who came in shouting the one word I had started to dread almost as much as knights. Visitors. Not one clan, 3, all at once, all drawn by the smell of a fight my people had actually won. By mid-morning, our narrow entrance looked less like a fortress gate and more like the worst market day in history, minus the market and most of the manors. The first clan came armed, testing the ground with spear butts before they tested it with words. The second came thin and quiet. Children shoved to the front, the kind of silence that only happens after a family has buried the ones who complain too loudly about hunger. The third came smug, and smug worried me far more than spears, because smug people already think they know how the story ends. That third group had come, I learned within the hour, for the mask. Their leader was a broad goblin named Orvin, who announced himself by walking straight past our line of guards, like cues were a joke invented for lesser tribes. He wanted to see the relic that had apparently grown teeth overnight. He wanted, more precisely, to take it home with him. What he found instead was Gruna's spear near his throat, a tally stick in Raga's hand, and 40 goblins in an orderly line waiting to have their names and their hunger counted before anyone went near the food store. Orvin looked at that line like it had personally insulted his ancestors. "This is not a kingdom," he said. "This is a counting house wearing a crown." I did not have a clever answer ready, so I gave him an honest one instead. "Then be glad you found a counting house. The alternative was a graveyard, and I am told those keep terrible records." A few goblins near the front laughed, which was worth more to me than anything cleverer I could have said myself. The first clan gave me a different kind of trouble. Their leader was a rangy old raider named Fesk, who wanted to know why his warriors had to hand their spears to a guard post before they could enter their own kin's new home. Because the last time armed strangers walked into this crypt uninvited, I told him, they left it in 11 pieces and a lot of blood that was not ours. "You can have your spears back at the door when you leave." Fest did not like the answer, but Gruna's stare made the argument for me, and he handed his spear over without further comment. The Crown Ledger, meanwhile, was having a small crisis of its own. Tribe contract, it offered, then locked, insufficient data. The mask had opinions about admitting 300 strangers into a home it had only just finished fortifying, and its opinion was that I did not yet know what I was doing. The mask, for once, was right. I did the math anyway, because someone had to, and I was the only person in the room who enjoyed it. 43 of us, fed and counted. Perhaps 160 more standing in that tunnel mouth if all 3 clans decided to stay. Food that had lasted us 14 days at our current numbers would not survive a week at those. I should have said some of that out loud before I opened my mouth to Shara. She came forward last, from the quiet second clan, and she did not kneel and she did not beg, which told me more about her than any introduction could have. Young for a clan leader, sharp-eyed, she watched me the way a trader watches a scale, before deciding whether to trust it. "My clan has 11 children and no warriors worth the name," she said. "We do not want your throne. We want a wall between us and the winter, and men who will not sell our girls to the first noble who offers grain for them. If you can be that wall, I will owe you nothing, and you will own nothing of me. If you cannot, say so now, so I can keep walking before the cold decides for us instead." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me since I put on the mask, and I answered it the way a drowning man answers a rope, which is to say too fast, and without checking how much weight the rope could actually hold. Yes, I said. Stay, all of you, we have room. We did not have room. I knew at the instant the word left my mouth, and I watched Raga's face do something complicated behind me. Not quite fury, not quite despair, sharing a border with both. She waited until Shar's people had been led toward the lower chambers before she turned on me, and Raga in that particular mood had never once needed to raise her voice to make a room feel smaller. You just fed a promise you cannot keep to 100 strangers, she said. Do you know what 14 days of stored food becomes when 300 new mouths start eating from it? I said I did, because the number had already been sitting in my chest like a swallowed stone. 8 days, I said. Perhaps less, if the mushroom beds do not keep pace with the new mouths. Then why did you say yes? Because the only other answer was watching children walk back out into weather that kills slower than nights, but just as certainly, I said. Some decisions you should not run through a ledger before you make them. I will find the accounting after. Raga's jaw tightened until I could see the muscle move under her scars. You are the accounting, Kael. That is the entire lie holding this place together. A king who feeds people he cannot afford to feed is not merciful. He is hungrier than the rest of us, only later. I almost told her that Lena would have said the same thing to me in the same tone, back when I still counted army rations for a living instead of a tribe's survival. I did not say it. Some names I only spend on myself, in the quiet, where they cost less. She was not wrong, and the worst part of being wrong in front of Raga is that being right never once fills a bowl. So we built the only thing that could, a rule ugly enough to survive contact with 300 desperate strangers. We called it the contribution law, mostly because contribution ledgers sounded kinder than the truth, which was that nobody eats in this crypt for free, myself included. Every mouth that entered from that morning owed the store something back. Wood carried, water hauled, watch stood, or hammered, anything that could be counted and written down in front of witnesses. The Crown Ledger liked this considerably more than it had liked my earlier burst of generosity. Contribution law, it wrote, warm against my collarbone for the first time in an hour. Labor contract, opened. Getting 3 clans who had never trusted each other to agree on what counted as labor took most of the afternoon and nearly cost Gruna her patience entirely. One old goblin insisted that shouting encouragement at the diggers was itself a form of digging. Brooke, of all people, was the one who ended that argument, mostly because he had spent the whole day hauling stone himself and had strong opinions about anyone who thought yelling counted as sweat. You want to eat? You carry something heavier than your own mouth, he told the old goblin, flat and final, and for once, nobody in the chamber felt like arguing with Brooke about the value of honest work. Crick, inevitably, made it worse before he made it better. He ran the length of the tunnel twice, announcing that the new law meant singing counted double, until Graham caught him by the collar and explained, patiently, that Crick had misheard the word counting. Miva showed up halfway through the shouting, took one look at the crowd arguing over what counted as work, and offered to settle it by testing everyone's usefulness with something from her jars. The threat alone ended 3 separate arguments faster than anything I said all day. Nobody wants to find out what Miva considers a fair dose. By evening, the numbers had a shape I could live with. 73 new hands went on to work rotations that same day, hauling and digging and hammering under Graham's tired but delighted direction. Because apparently nothing pleased an old smith more than an army of free labor who did not yet know how to complain properly. 12 more, younger and quicker, went to Gruna as scouts, doubling her eyes on the tunnels by nightfall. I watched Nara ladle broth into the thin second clan's children with the particular fierceness of a woman who remembered exactly what an empty bowl looks like from the inside. And for one quiet minute, the day felt almost worth its cost. Not everyone was pleased. Some of the older chiefs from the first, armed clan muttered that giving weak clans a legal path to food, instead of making them fight for scraps, was going to spoil them, as though starving people into obedience had ever produced anything but corpses and grudges. I let them mutter. A chief who resents fairness usually reveals himself faster than one who hides it. By the time the tunnel torches burned low, I found Shara again. She was standing over the new scout roster, with an expression I was starting to recognize as her version of approval, which looked mostly like suspicion with the volume turned down. My people will scout for you, she said. Not because I trust you, because a wall built on numbers is more honest than one built on a crowd's promise. And I have outlived enough crowns to know the difference between them. That will do, I said, and meant it. Because I had learned enough in one very long week to know that loyalty bought too cheaply rarely survives its first real test. Trust earned slowly held better weight than any oath sworn at a knife point. Orvin, to nobody's great surprise, was far less impressed with the arrangement. He had spent the whole day watching goblins line up, work, eat, and line up again, and none of it matched the story he had told himself on the walk over about a mad king handing out stolen power like loose coin. "You built a counting house," he said again, this time with less confidence and more confusion, like a man discovering the joke had been on him the entire day. "I built a tribe that survived 30 nights last night, while yours was still deciding whether it was safe to rob a corpse," I said. "You are welcome to leave with whatever dignity you walked in with. There is not much of it left, but I will not charge you for the rest." He left before dawn with perhaps a third of his people, the ones who preferred a myth to a meal, and the rest quietly joined the work rotations without asking my permission, because hungry legs make decisions faster than proud mouths ever do. The Crown Ledger, working through the night the way it always did, caught up with the day's arithmetic. Tribe contract, partial, population, 43 core to a possible 160 pledged. Scout network, level 1, authority, unstable, climbing. I should have felt like a king that night. Mostly I felt like a man who had spent an entire day discovering how expensive kindness becomes once you start doing the arithmetic honestly instead of hiding from it. It was Thomas, of all people, still watching everything from his corner of the prisoner hold with a captured man's patience, who told me the part that mattered most. A traitor who had drifted in with the third clan had been talking in the tunnels before Orvin dragged him back out, asking careful questions about a man in a dead king's mask. He was not asking out of curiosity, Thomas said. He was asking on someone else's behalf, someone with a considerably better claim to that mask than you have. I did not need to ask the name. I had already heard it once, in the careful way Raga avoided saying it out loud, the way you avoid naming a storm before it is finished gathering. Dragul. I found Raga afterward and said the name to her plainly to see what her face would do. It did nothing, which told me everything. She had been waiting for that word since the first night I put on the mask, and waiting had not made it any easier to hear. "He is not a rumor you can outcount," she said. "He is not hungry, and he does not want your ledgers. He wants what the mask owes him by right of blood, and one day he will come to collect it in person. Then I have time to build something worth collecting instead of something worth burning," I said, with more confidence than I actually owned. Raga did not answer. She simply looked at the tunnel mouth where Orvin's people had left, and then at the new 160 souls now eating from my count, and said nothing at all, which from Raga was its own kind of warning. Somewhere, beyond my hard-won little counting house, with new mouse eating on my word and a mask still warm from one more lie that had survived the night, the tribe's true king was finally hearing that a human had been wearing his father's face and calling it a crown. Draggle's name sat in my chest for 2 days like a swallowed coal, warm and useless and impossible to spit back out. I could not fight a rumor. I could not outcount a bloodline. So I did what I always do with a problem too large to solve directly, which is ignore it loudly and go solve a smaller one instead. The smaller one was that we were, in the most literal sense, running out of everything that was not food or stone. Salt had gone from 2 sacks to a double handful, which meant every piece of meat we cured from now on was one bad summer away from rotting in storage instead of feeding anyone. Cloth for wounds had run down to torn shirts and prayer. Books, actual manuals, the kind Graham needed to remember a forging technique his hands had half forgotten, numbered 0. Tools were breaking faster than Graham could mend them. He showed me his best remaining chisel that morning, the edge chipped down to a stub, and told me flatly that steel does not grow back just because a king wishes it did. Nara needed cloth worse than anyone, for a boy in the second clan's group who had torn his leg open on rubble during the move, and I watched her tear one of her own few shirts into strips rather than come to me and ask for something the store did not have. That was the moment the shortage stopped being a column of numbers in my head and became a child's leg wrapped in his mother's last spare shirt, the one arithmetic that has ever actually moved me to act quickly. The Crown Ledger, when I asked it for help, gave me nothing but a locked door. Economy tab, it offered. Then, locked, insufficient trade data. Apparently kings who only steal and grow mushrooms do not get to see the shopkeeper's version of the mask's power. I would have to earn that door the ordinary way, which is to say, the hard way. Bruck had opinions, because Bruck always has opinions when the answer involves less hitting than he would prefer. We solved the salt problem the last time by taking it, he said. We can solve this one the same way. Find a caravan, take what we need. It worked before. It worked before because Varric did not yet know a man was giving us orders, I told him. Every wagon we rob now is a wagon Odrin hears about within a day, and every report that reaches him makes Lena's cage a little smaller. I am not spending my wife's safety to save us a shopping trip. Brooke did not have an answer for that, which was rare enough that I almost enjoyed it. Shara's scouts, only 2 days into their new duties, were the ones who actually solved the problem, which told me I had made at least one good decision that week. One of them, a quick, quiet girl named Pef, came back with word of a smuggler who ran goods under Baron Odrin's checkpoints for anyone willing to pay her price and asked no questions about where the goods came from. Her name was Leia. Nobody in Three Valleys trusted her completely, Pef reported, and nobody in Three Valleys could get salt, cloth, or a decent blade past Odrin's toll roads without her either. I sent word through the tunnels the way Pef suggested, careful and indirect, and Leia agreed to meet at a half-collapsed shepherd's hut 2 ridges from the crypt, which told me she was cautious enough to survive and arrogant enough to think a shepherd's hut was safe from goblins who had just leveled a mausoleum full of knights. She arrived on time, which I respected, wrapped in a traveling cloak the color of dead leaves, and she looked at Gruna and Brooke standing behind me with an expression that made it very clear she had already priced the risk of this meeting and decided we were worth it. Barely. So the rumors are true, she said. The fake king actually runs goblin commerce now. Next you will tell me they have started minting coin with your ugly face on it. Only on the small coins, I told her. The large ones just have the mask stamped on them instead. It scares people into better exchange rates. She did not laugh, but the corner of her mouth moved, which, from a woman who had clearly spent years training her face not to show anything for free, was practically applause. I could work with mockery. Mockery meant she had already decided to negotiate instead of leaving. Not commerce, I told her. Necessity. We need salt, cloth, tools, and whatever manuals your people carry that are not currently glued shut with someone else's blood. We can pay in worked iron, in tunnel-cured meat, or in something considerably more valuable than either. Leia raised one eyebrow, unimpressed, which is a difficult expression to fake and an easy one to read. I have heard that line from every desperate lord in this valley. What could a hole full of goblins possibly have that I cannot already buy cheaper from someone with fewer teeth missing? That was when Brooke decided the negotiation needed muscle instead of words, which is the exact moment every negotiation Brooke has ever touched has gone sideways. He stepped forward, closer than was polite, and told her, flatly, that she would sell to us at a fair price or she would not walk back out through that door with her legs working the same way she walked in. Leia's whole posture changed in half a heartbeat, from bored merchant to a woman already counting exits. I have dealt with threats from men with better manners and worse breath, she said, backing one step toward the door. I do not need this trade badly enough to die for it. I put myself between them before Brooke could compound the mistake, and I did not raise my voice, because raising my voice at that particular second would have finished what Brooke started. Nobody threatens my guess, I told him, low and final, and he had the sense to step back and say nothing, though his jaw told me the argument was not over between us. Then I turned back to Leia, who was still measuring the distance to the door, and I threw away the entire pitch I'd planned and offered her something else instead. I am not selling you goods, I said. I am selling you a road. Every wagon you run past Odrin's checkpoints pays his toll or risks his patrols. I have 3 tunnels under this valley that come up outside every one of his toll stations, dry, defended, and completely invisible to a man who has never had to look down. That got the eyebrow up again, differently this time. You are offering me a way to rob a baron of his own taxes, she said slowly, tasting the idea the way a trader tastes the coin before deciding whether it is real. That is either the smartest thing anyone has said to me this year or the fastest way to get us both hanged. Possibly both, I told her. I have found the two are not mutually exclusive lately. She laughed, short and genuine, and for once since she had arrived, she looked at me like a person worth doing business with instead of a rumor wearing a mask. I still do not trust you, she said, and I still think your Brooke there is one bad mood away from getting someone killed. But a free road under Odrin's own toll booths is worth more to me than any handful of iron you could offer. Show me the tunnel's work, and we will talk numbers. We showed her. It took most of the afternoon and every ounce of patience Gruna had left, guiding one very suspicious smuggler through 3 dry tunnels that came up exactly where I had promised, past checkpoints that never saw so much as a shadow, and by the time we came back up into daylight, Leia's whole manner had changed from careful mockery to something closer to respect. The transactional kind, the only kind that actually holds weight with a woman like her. The Crown Ledger felt the shift before I fully understood it myself. Root value, recognized. Trade offer, no longer rejected. Black market route, unlocking. We spent the evening on numbers, the good honest kind that Raga had taught me to trust more than promises. 2 sacks of salt became a standing trade stock instead of a memory. 18 tools, real forged ones, not scavenged scrap, went into Graham's hands within the week. 3 actual manuals, water-stained but readable, join the Forge Corner's small library. Route contracts, 0 to 1. Authority climbed while I watched it, 900 sliding toward 1200. The Crown Ledger noting, with what I can only describe as satisfaction, that Baron Odrin's tax revenue on that stretch of road had quietly begun to shrink, and would keep shrinking every single week we kept our mouths shut about how. Leia, before she left, unrolled one more thing across the table, almost as an afterthought. A merchant's habit of throwing in one extra item to make the whole trade feel generous. A hand-drawn map of the toll roads and checkpoints she used, marked with every patrol route and watch schedule she had bought or bribed her way into over the years. Thomas, who had been sitting quietly against the wall through the entire negotiation, the way captured knights learn to make themselves furniture, leaned forward suddenly and put one finger on a building marked near the map's edge. A square tower beside a walled garden. "I know that building," he said, and his voice had lost its usual careful flatness. "That is Odrin's healer tower. I stood guard outside it twice before Varric took me on the road. That is where they keep anyone the Baron wants alive but controlled." I did not need him to finish the thought. I had been carrying the shape of that tower in my chest since the night Varric's men took her, and here it was, drawn in careful ink by a smuggler who had no idea what she had just handed me. Leia, watching my face do whatever it was doing, went very still. "Careful," she said. "Whoever you are looking for in that tower, the healer tower does not hold prisoners long. People move through it fast, in and out within the week, because Odrin does not like keeping anything valuable in one place for long." Thomas confirmed it before I could ask. Word in the garrison, before I was taken, was that the tower rotates its wards every few days for safety. If someone important is being held there now, she will not be held there much longer. How much longer, I asked, and I already knew I was not going to like the answer. Pef, one of Sashara's scouts, had drifted close enough to catch the last of the conversation, and she was the one who finally put a number on my fear. 2 days, she said. My cousin trades grain to the tower kitchens. She said new transport orders came through yesterday. Whoever is inside gets moved in 2 days. 2 days. I looked at the map, at the tower, at the careful ink lines Leia had drawn, without knowing she was drawing my wife's prison, and I understood that the trade I had just closed to fill our shelves with salt and tools had also handed me the one thing I had wanted since the night I fell into this crypt, and a clock I had never asked for. Gruna caught the look on my face before I said a single word about it, because Gruna has learned to read me the way she reads a battlefield, for the one detail that changes everything else. "Do not," she said, in a voice pitched for me alone. "Whatever is happening behind your eyes right now, do not decide it alone tonight. 2 days is enough time to plan. It is not enough time to survive you deciding to be brave without us." She was right, and I hated that she was right. And I folded Leia's map along its careful ink lines, instead of crushing it in my fist the way I wanted to. Because a king who ruins his own map in front of witnesses is not a king anyone plans a rescue around. 2 days, I told her. Then we go get my wife back, and we do it the way that keeps everyone alive, including her. 2 days sounds like a long time, until you spend the first 4 hours of it trying not to run out the tunnel mouth alone and start walking toward Odrin's tower with nothing but a kitchen knife and a very bad plan. I got as far as the entrance before Gruna caught my arm hard enough to leave a mark. "Let go of me," I told her, and my voice came out uglier than I meant it to. Cracked in a way I had not let it crack since the night Varric first put me on my knees in front of my own soldiers. "No," she said, and did not let go. "Tell me your plan, not the feeling, the plan." "I do not have a plan," I said. "I have 2 days and a wife in a tower, and every hour I spend drawing pictures on a table is an hour she spends closer to a cart that takes her somewhere I will never find again." "Then walk in alone and die at the gate," Gruna said, flat and merciless in this specific way only Gruna manages, "and give Odrin exactly what he wants, which is proof that killing your wife draws you out of this hole so he can finish both of you in one afternoon." I hated her for being right nearly as much as I loved her for saying it anyway. That is the crack, I think. The actual one. The moment my voice finally broke all the way, and I stood in that tunnel mouth and admitted out loud to my war captain that I was 1 bad hour away from throwing away everything we had built, because I could not stand feeling helpless for one more night. Gruna's grip on my arm eased, not because she had softened, but because she had made her point and did not need to keep making it. "I am not asking you to feel less," she added, quieter now. "I buried a mate to a bad decision made in this kind of hour. I am asking you to feel it sitting down, with people around you who can catch the parts of the plan you are too angry to see." That landed harder than the arm grab had. I had never once heard Gruna mention a mate, a loss, anything behind the war captain's flat competence, and she had chosen this exact moment, watching me, about to make her old mistake, to spin that memory on stopping me from repeating it. "Good," she said. "Now you sound like a man who can be talked out of a stupid plan and into a smart one. Sit down. Think like the king who counted a tribe into a fortress, not like the husband who is about to get her killed trying to save her badly." So I sat down and I thought, and by midnight, we had something that was not a rescue by force, because a rescue by force was a corpse with my face on it, and Lena still in that trap. It was a rescue by paperwork, because paperwork was the one weapon I had never stopped carrying, even after I stopped being anyone's quartermaster. Odrin's tower ran on transfer orders, prisoner logs, requisition slips, the same dull machinery I'd spent years feeding for the army before Varric decided I made a more useful thief than clerk. Nobody guards paper the way they guard a gate. Paper is boring, and boring is the one disguise nobody thinks to search. I spent 3 hours copying the exact phrasing off an old requisition slip Thomas still had memorized from his own posting. I copied the clumsy formal language every garrison clerk uses without thinking. The prisoner transfer authorized under seal, the escort of 2, the destination given as the Eastern Holding Block. It would not survive a careful reader. It only needed to survive a tired one at first light. Leia's map, outdated in exactly one detail that nearly cost us everything, still gave us the shape of the guard rotation, the kitchen deliveries, the one gate that took goods instead of soldiers. Miva handed over 4 smoke pellets from her jars without being asked twice, muttering something about finally getting to use the good ones on people who deserved it. Graham found 3 sets of decent human clothing among the captured knight's gear, close enough to a transfer escort's colors to pass a bored guard's glance in torchlight, if nobody looked too long. 2 of those uniforms went on me and Thomas. The 3rd stayed folded in a saddlebag because I refused to plan a rescue that did not include something for Lena to walk out wearing besides prison rags. Thomas did not ask why I trusted a captured knight enough to walk him back into his own baron's tower. I think we both understood the answer without saying it. A man who has already told me the truth about Bruck and about Varric's convoy has already chosen a side, whether either of us wanted to say the word out loud. We went in at the kitchen gate an hour before dawn, me with a stack of transfer papers I had spent half the night forging in careful, boring, official handwriting. Thomas beside me in a knight's colors that still fit him better than the last month of his life had. The guard at the gate barely looked at the papers before waving us through, which told me everything I needed to know about how little anyone in that tower expected trouble to arrive dressed as paperwork. That was the last thing that went according to plan. Leia's schedule had the night watch rotating at the second bell. It rotated at the first instead, a full hour earlier, because some captain somewhere had decided to change the pattern after the recent unrest. And we walked straight into a hallway that should have been empty and instead had 2 extra guards standing exactly where our route wanted to go. I froze for half a heartbeat, the kind of freeze that gets people killed, and it was Thomas, not me, who kept walking forward like he owned the hallway. He snapped out an order about a transfer delay in a voice that still remembered exactly how to sound like a man who belonged there. It bought us 4 steps and a turned corner, which was not much, but 4 steps is an entire universe when you need 3. We found the healer's wing where the map said, and I found Lena exactly where I had imagined her every night since Varric dragged her away. Except imagining her had not prepared me for how steady she looked. She was kneeling beside a sick guard's cot with a bowl of something bitter smelling in her hands, working like the room belonged to her instead of to the man who had locked her in it. She looked up, saw me in a stolen uniform with forged papers in my hand, and did not scream, did not cry, did not do any of the things I had braced myself to comfort her. She simply set the bowl down, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "Took you long enough," in a tone that could have curdled milk. I do not have a clever answer for that, I told her, which was true, because every clever thing I had planned to say had evaporated the moment I actually saw her face. "Good," she said. "Save the clever answers for later. I have something you are going to want more than an apology." From beneath a loose floor tile, she pulled a folded bundle of papers she had been copying by candlelight for weeks. Ledger pages in a hand she had learned to forge from watching the tower's own scribes. They were records of supplies requisitioned and never delivered, army stores sold quietly through Varric's name to buyers who paid better than the crown did. The exact theft I was hanged for in front of my own soldiers, written in the exact hand of the man who framed me for it, I said, mostly to myself, because some truths need to be said out loud before they feel real. "I also made this," Lena said, holding up a small stoppered vial, in case the guards on duty tonight needed a long, uneventful sleep instead of a difficult conversation. "I've been dosing their tea for 3 nights running, small enough not to be noticed, strong enough that most of this wing will not wake before dawn, no matter what happens in it. I stood there in a dead man's stolen uniform, holding stolen proof of my own innocence, next to a wife who had spent her captivity building an escape route out of bitterness, patience, and other people's tea, and I understood, not for the first time, that I had married considerably better than I deserved. "You could have told them nothing," I said. "You could have waited quietly and let us come find you. Instead, you turned a prison cell into an intelligence office." Lena tied the vial into a fold of her apron and did not look up from the work. "Waiting quietly has never once fixed anything I have watched," she said. "I learned that from a husband who once turned a supply closet into the only reason our garrison did not starve one winter. I had less paper and worse tea to work with. It was, I realize, the first time either of us had smiled since the crypt. We were 3 doors from the kitchen gate when the corridor behind us filled with torchlight, and the one voice in that tower I had hoped never to hear again. Varric had come to check on his hostage personally, which meant either he had grown paranoid or grown cruel. And either way, he stood between us and the only clean exit we had. Sword already half drawn, staring at a supply clerk and a captured knight walking his prisoner and his stolen documents straight out the door. "You," he said, looking at me, and something behind his eyes did the arithmetic faster than I wanted it to. "The clerk. The traitor. I should have made certain of you myself instead of trusting a graveyard to finish the job." Behind him, 2 more guards were turning the corner at the sound of his voice, drawn in by exactly the kind of noise a smart infiltration is supposed to avoid making, and for one very bad second, I understood that we were not going to talk our way out of this hallway. Thomas moved before I could, stepping fully into the corridor between us and Varric's blade. And something in his stance had changed completely from the careful, transactional prisoner who had spent weeks trading information for survival. "I know what you did to the supply stores," Thomas said, steady even with the sword pointed at his chest. "I have known for a while. I chose not to say it because I was still deciding what kind of man I wanted to be when I got out of this. I have decided." Varric's blade came for him anyway, because men like Varric do not stop for speeches, and Thomas took the cut across his forearm that was meant for his ribs. He staggered but did not fall, buying me the 2 seconds I needed to throw the last smoke pellet at the stone floor between us. The corridor filled with Miva's harsh gray smoke, and in the choking confusion, Varric's shout turned from triumph to fury, and I grabbed Lena's hand and Thomas's collar and ran for the gate the way a man runs when there is nothing left to plan, only to move. We came out through the kitchen gate into cold pre-dawn air, with a wounded knight leaning on my shoulder, a wife carrying evidence that could unmake a nobleman, and a smuggler's tunnel waiting exactly where Leia had promised it would be. Gruna was there at the tunnel mouth with her fighters, and I have never in my life been so glad to see someone armed and unbothered by the sight of blood. She looked at Thomas's arm, at Lena's steady hands, already working a proper bandage over my clumsy field one, and at me, still shaking from a corridor I had barely survived talking my way out of, and she said nothing at all, which from Gruna was its own kind of approval. Sitting down had worked. The plan had held, barely, the way plans made by frightened men often do. Varric lost his hostage and his witness in the same single night, and by the time his men searched the healer's wing properly, all they found was an empty cot, a sleeping guard detail, and a floor tile that no longer sat quite flush with the ones around it. The crown ledger, catching up somewhere in the tunnel while I pressed a strip of cloth hard against Thomas's arm, spoke. "Odrin documents, +1 bundle. Human evidence, acquired. Medicine unit, unlocking. Lena, function recognized." I do not need a system to tell me what my wife is good at, I told it, mostly out of exhausted spite, and for once the mask had the decency not to argue with me. We did not stop properly until we were deep enough in the tunnels that torchlight from the tower could not have found us if it tried. And it was there, in a low stone passage with Thomas gritting his teeth through Lena's stitches, and Goblin standing guard at both ends like this was simply another night's work, that Lena finally looked past me at the tunnel itself. At Gruna's fighters, at the mask still hanging from a cord around my neck, because I had not dared wear it into a human tower. "They call you king," she said quietly. Not a question exactly, more like she was testing the weight of the word in her own mouth. "They do," I said. "And you let them," she said. "Kael, I need to know something, and I need you to actually answer me instead of giving me the clever version. Are you still pretending to survive, or somewhere in the last month did you start actually believing you were one?" I started to answer, and found, for the first time since I put that mask on in a dark crypt, that I did not have a fast answer ready at all. I did not have a fast answer for Lena, so I gave her a slow one instead, sitting on a cold stone bench in a tunnel that smelled like smoke and other people's blood, because some questions deserve better than a clever dodge. "I started this to save myself," I told her. "You know that already. I put on a dead man's mask because the alternative was a rope, and I gave that first order because alive sounded less insane than the other option on the table." "That part I already knew," Lena said. "I'm asking about now. not the crypt. Now I have a woman I could not feed until I learned to count properly, and a boy who kept his supper down because I fixed a vent, and a man who guards a store he tried to rob because I gave him a way back that was not a blade, I said. I do not know how to stop being responsible for that, just because the reason I started was ugly. Lena studied me the way she used to study a wound before deciding whether it needed stitches or simply time, which is a look I have never once been able to lie to. That is not the same as believing you are a king, she said. Do not confuse being needed with being real. I am not confused, I told her, and meant it, though even as I said it, I could feel how thin the line had gotten between the two. I know exactly what I am. I am a man in a dead man's mask who has made himself useful enough that a few hundred people would rather keep the lie than lose what it built. That is not a crown. That is a debt I am still paying down. Then keep paying it honestly, she said, and do not let me watch you start believing your own paperwork. She did not say it unkindly. She said it the way a healer names an infection before it spreads, plainly, because naming it early is the only mercy that actually helps. She took my hand then, not gently exactly, more the way she used to check a pulse, businesslike and certain. I did not marry a king, Kael, she said. I married a man who could not stop fixing things even when nobody asked him to. I am still deciding whether this crown is one more thing you fixed or the first thing you broke trying. I did not have an answer for that either. I am starting to think that particular question does not have one yet, only a direction it keeps pointing. I would like to say we settled it there, in that quiet tunnel, with nothing but honesty between us. We did not get the chance. Gruna's voice came down the passage before either of us could say another word, sharp and clipped in a way that meant trouble had a name and a face and was already standing at our door. He is here, she said. The old blood, Dragul. I had heard the name enough times by then that I thought I was ready for it. I was not ready for the man himself. He came alone into the main chamber, which was either supreme confidence or supreme contempt, flanked by nothing but two silent honor guards who stayed at the tunnel mouth. He walked forward through a crowd of my own goblins, like he owned the floor beneath their feet, and looking at him, I understood immediately why Raga had spent weeks avoiding his name the way you avoid naming weather that is already forming. He was built the way old stories build kings, broad through the shoulders, scarred in the specific way that reads as history instead of misfortune. And he wore the bearing of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be heard. He wore his father's old war marks tattooed across one shoulder, faded but unmistakable to every goblin old enough to remember the last true king. And he wore them the way other men wear a crown, without needing to point at them, because everyone in that chamber already knew exactly what they meant. He stopped in front of the throne pit I had built out of salvaged stone and captured pride, looked at the mask hanging against my chest, and did not bow, did not sneer, simply studied it, the way a smith studies a blade someone else forged badly. You wear my father's face, he said, and his voice carried without effort to every corner of the chamber. A human, wearing a dead Goblin King's mask, teaching my people to count grain instead of take it. I have heard the stories from 3 valleys away, and did not believe them until I smelled the man myself. You do not even smell like a king. You smell like a clerk who got lucky. A ripple went through the older warriors at that, the kind of ripple that told me some of them agreed with him before he had finished the sentence. I am not going to pretend I am your father, I said, because pretending had gotten me this far and no further, and something told me Drago would smell that lie faster than any other. I never claimed his blood. I claimed what was in front of me the night his tribe was starving, and his mask was gathering dust in a crypt nobody had listed in 3 nights. Blood does not need to claim anything, Dragul said. Blood simply is. You built ledgers and stores and little laws because you have no strength of your own to offer, and you have convinced hungry people that counting is the same as ruling. I offer something older and considerably more honest. Meat when we are hungry, raids when we are wronged, fear from anyone stupid enough to test us. Instead of tax collectors and toll roads and human paperwork dressed up as mercy, I watched the words land, and they landed well because he was not lying about what he offered, and lies are easy to fight, while honest, deductive nonsense is not. Some of you remember what we were before this human taught you to wait in lines, Drago went on, turning slowly so every warrior in the chamber felt looked at. We were feared, now you are fed, and you call that a victory. I call it the taste of a leash you have not yet noticed around your own necks. I saw it happen in real time, the way 3, maybe 4 of the younger fighters near Gruna's ranks shifted their weight, not toward him exactly, but away from certainty, which in a crowd like that is very nearly the same thing. Gruna's jaw tightened. Even Raga, standing near the store entrance with her staff gripped harder than usual, did not look entirely steady. Shara had gone very quiet near the back of the chamber, her scouts pressed close around her the way a clan leader gathers people when a room turns dangerous. Raids in fear were not an abstraction to her. Raids in fear were the exact reason her clan had 11 children and no warriors worth the name in the first place. And I watched her decide in real time which side of this argument had ever actually protected her people. Even Crick, who spent most days finding new ways to misunderstand simple instructions, had gone still and serious at my elbow, close enough that I could feel him not quite hiding behind my shoulder, which told me the fear in that chamber had reached all the way down to the goblin who found the mask funny on the first night. The crown ledger flared against my skin, hot and unhappy. Blood claim, detected, authority, 1200, destabilizing. And underneath that, a number I had never once wanted to see attached to my own people. Young warriors, defection risk, near 1 in 3. I could have argued blood. I would have lost, because blood is not an argument, it is a fact, and facts do not care how good your counterargument sounds. So I did not argue blood. I turned instead and pointed, first at the clinic tunnel, where Lena stood in the doorway with her sleeves still rolled to the elbow from the morning's work. 17, I said. 17 goblins who would be dead or crippled without her hands and my supply lines, alive today, working today, because a human taught this tribe that healing is not weakness. Ask any one of them if they would trade her back for a raid. Nobody in that clinic doorway looked eager to answer Dragul's way, and one old goblin near the back, missing half a hand to an old wound Lena had saved the rest of, simply crossed his arms and stared Dragul down without a word, which said more than any speech could have. I pointed next at the forge, where Graham stood surrounded by racks of real steel instead of sharpened stone. 40 weapons, I said. 40 blades your father's tribe never had, made from iron your father's tribe never controlled, because a clerk understood how to turn a raided convoy into a forge instead of a feast. Ask Graham whether counting made this tribe weaker. Graham did not answer either. He simply lifted one of the finished blades, turned it once in the torchlight so the whole chamber could see the edge, and set it back down without a word, which from a smith prouder of his work than his own name was as loud as any oath. I finished at the food store, sealed, stocked, guarded by a man who once tried to rob it himself. Ask Bruck, I said, whether the store makes us soft. He is the one standing in front of it. Bruck did not smile. Bruck never smiles. But he did not step aside either, and he did not say a word in Dragul's favor. And for a man who had spent 3 parts of this story hating everything I stood for, his silence in that exact moment was worth more than applause. Dragul watched all of it, unimpressed on the surface, though something behind his eyes had gone very still and careful, the look of a man recalculating an argument he had been certain of a minute earlier. Results are not blood, he said, quieter now, which told me he had felt the room shift even if he refused to admit it out loud. A fed dog is still a dog. But I will grant you this much. You have built something that will not simply blow away the moment I raise my voice, and that is more than I expected from a human wearing my father's bones. Some of the kin who had drifted close to his side through the whole speech peeled away then, quietly, back toward the clinic, the forge, the store, choosing with their feet what they had not yet said with their mouths. Not all of them. A hard knot of the old guard warriors stayed where they were, close to Dragul, unconvinced by ledgers, still hungry for the older, simpler promise of fear. The crown ledger settled into something I had never seen it show before. Not victory, not defeat, simply a status hanging open and unresolved. Status, contested. Raga's face, when I finally looked at her, told me the rest before Dragul said it out loud. The old law allows a blood claim to be tested, she said quietly, only to me, just loud enough to carry. Not fought in the dark. Fought in front of everyone, by the old right, at the mask itself. Dragul heard her anyway, because Dragul had clearly been counting on exactly that law the entire time he walked in. 7 days, he said, turning back toward the tunnel mouth where his silent guards waited. I will give this tribe 7 days to see what your ledgers are worth against blood. Then we settle this the way it was always going to be settled, mask against claim, in front of everyone you have fed, healed, and armed, so they can watch which one of us this crown truly recognizes. He left the way he had entered, unhurried, certain, and the chamber did not relax the way it had after Varric's men knelt in the smoke. It simply held its breath, because for the first time since the mask closed over my face, I had an enemy who was not wrong about a single thing he had said, and only 7 days to prove that being right about my crimes did not mean he was right about my crown. Lena found my hand again in the quiet after he was gone, and this time she did not let go of it to make a point. I still do not know what you are, she said, low, meant for no one but me. But I know what you built while you were figuring it out, and I am not leaving it, or you, to find out how the old blood settles that argument alone. It was not forgiveness, and it was not surrender either. It was simply Lena, choosing the only honest ground left standing between a lie that had grown teeth and a truth that had not yet finished arriving. And for one very long, very tired night, I let that be enough. 7 days is not enough time to learn how to beat a man like Draggle in a fight. I knew that before he finished his sentence in the throne chamber, and pretending otherwise would have wasted the only resource I actually had left, which was time I could spend building instead of bleeding. So I did not train. I called a council instead. Every unit function I had spent 2 months assembling crammed into one chamber at once, and I told them the truth, because lying to this particular room would have wasted the last honest week I might ever get. I am going to lose the ritual if it comes down to strength, I said. I am not going to pretend otherwise to any of you. What I can do in 7 days is make sure that whatever happens to me, this tribe is standing on something too solid for one duel to knock over. Raga was the first to speak, which surprised no one. The old law respects proof as much as blood, she said. It always has. Kings have been challenged and kept their crowns before, when the tribe itself refused to let a result be undone by a single fight. Build me something to point at, Kael, and I will make sure every goblin in this city knows exactly what they are choosing between. That is all I need from you, I told her. Faith, backed by something real enough to survive a hard look. Gruna wanted defense lines doubled, watchers on every tunnel mouth, because a man secure enough to demand a ritual in 7 days was also a man who might not wait patiently for it. Miva wanted the alchemy corner expanded into a proper lab, more filters, more medicine stock, because whatever happened at the ritual, sick and wounded people were not going to stop needing her in the meantime. Shara offered her scouts and her clan's remaining hands for labor, on the condition that the work rotation counted toward her people's standing the same as anyone born in this crypt. Leia, summoned through the tunnel route she now half-owned, promised faster deliveries on anything Graham's Forge needed, for a price that had gotten noticeably friendlier since the tunnel trade started paying her better than honest fear ever had. Lena said she wanted 12 beds instead of 6, and did not wait for permission before drawing up where the extra space would come from. Miva, arms crossed, pointed out that a proper lab meant she could finally stop boiling half her tinctures over an open fire, like some hedge witch from a bad story, and that if I wanted 7 days of miracles, I could at least get her a second workbench for the trouble. I told her she could have 2. She looked almost disappointed there was nothing left to argue about. We queued 5 projects at once, which the Crown Ledger noted with something that felt suspiciously like nervousness. City Ledger, Level 1, Underground City Project, opened, Unit Coordination, active. 5 queues running in parallel, water collection, expanded clinic, forge output, a proper trading market, and terrace mushroom farms deep enough to feed 600 mouths instead of 40. Bruck, predictably, hated all of it on sight. You are turning warriors into diggers, he said, arms crossed, standing where he always stood, planted like a man daring the world to move him. This is not what a king does. A king leads a charge. A king does not hand out shovels. A king who cannot win the charge had better be very good with shovels, I told him. And then, because I had been waiting for the right moment to say it properly, I gave him something he had clearly not expected. You are running labor coordination. All 5 projects, all the crews, all the arguments about who digs where and who eats first. If this city stands in 7 days, it stands because you made it stand. Bruck stared at me like I had just handed him a live coal. He opened his mouth to argue, closed it again, and settled on a scowl that I had learned by then meant he had already accepted the job and simply needed a moment to be furious about it in private. For 2 days it went almost too well, and 2 easy days in a row is a thing I had already learned to distrust in this life, even when I could not yet say why. Water collectors went up first. 5 channels cut and angled to catch runoff from the old stone above us, feeding into cisterns Miva had lined with the same charcoal filtering trick that had once turned a swamp exile's poison knowledge into clean drinking water for 40 starving goblins. The clinic expansion moved fastest of all, because Lena had already drawn up the plans in her head during her long captivity. Watching her direct the digging crew with the same clipped precision she once used on a ledger of stolen supplies was, I will admit, more attractive than I had any business finding it during a labor crisis. The forge crew doubled Graham's output within a day by building him a second furnace and giving him enough hands to feed both at once, though he complained the whole time that 2 furnaces meant 2 chances for someone to burn themselves badly enough to need Lena's new beds. We were digging the 3rd water channel deeper than any of the others, into ground none of us had properly mapped, when the tunnel gave. It did not warn us. One moment Bruck was directing a crew of 12 through a narrow support corridor, and the next the ceiling let go all at once, with a sound like the whole crypt clearing its throat, dust and stone crashing down in a gray wall that swallowed the torchlight whole. I felt the floor shake under my own feet 3 chambers away, and I was running before I had finished deciding to. The dust reached me before the tunnel did. thick enough to taste. And somewhere ahead of me in the gray, a goblin child was screaming for a father who had been on that cruise since dawn, a sound that turned my legs faster than any order Gruna could have shouted. Gruna reached the collapse before I did, already shouting names into the dust, already organizing the goblins nearest the wreckage into a chain to clear rubble by hand, instead of standing around panicking. Because panicking is a luxury a war captain has never once allowed herself. 6 workers trapped, she called back to me the moment I arrived, coughing dust out of my throat. Bruck is one of them. Lena was already there too, kit slung over one shoulder, kneeling at the edge of the rubble, calling instructions to anyone conscious enough to answer her. And Miva came right behind her with an armful of wet cloth, soaking it in the nearest cistern and pressing it into shaking hands, because dust that thick could choke a trapped goblin just as surely as the stone could crush one. Breathe through the cloth. Not the air, she kept repeating, low and steady, moving from person to person, like this was one more day at her jars. It took most of an hour to clear enough rubble to reach the 2 pockets where all 6 had survived, pressed into gaps the collapse had left by pure ugly luck. 3 goblins in one hollow, and Bruck with the last 2 in another. And we pulled every single one of them out alive, coughing and filthy, but alive. The screaming child's father among them, walking out on his own legs to a daughter who nearly knocked him back down hugging him. Bruck came out last, bleeding from a gash along one arm, coughing gray dust with every breath. And he did not say a single word about warriors and shovels. He simply sat against the tunnel wall while Lena worked on his arm, staring at the collapsed corridor like it had personally betrayed him. And when he finally spoke, it was quieter than I had ever heard him. I have stood in a shield line against knights, he said. I was not afraid there. I did not know I could be afraid of a hole in the ground. Building is not softer than fighting, I told him. It is just a different kind of enemy. This one does not announce itself first. The Crown Ledger agreed with him more than it agreed with me. Underground city project, unstable. Authority, holding, not rising. It would not credit me a single point for ambition, while 6 of my people had nearly died proving the ambition was too large for the tunnels holding it up. We needed better supports than green timber and hope, and the only person in the crypt who actually knew how to cut stone bracing the old way, the way it had been done before any of us were born, was standing quietly at the edge of the wreckage, with his tool bag already in hand. Graham had said almost nothing since the collapse. He simply walked the length of the damaged corridor twice, running his fingers along old chisel marks in the stone that none of the rest of us had ever noticed. Marks left by whoever had originally carved these passages centuries before a Goblin King ever wore that mask. There are royal chambers sealed off past the old shrine, he said. Support stone in there, cut and shaped generations ago for this kind of ground. Nobody has opened those doors in longer than I have been alive. I know the old marks. I can find the right pieces if someone will help me carry them. Nobody has opened them because they are the previous king's tomb, Raga said quietly, and something in her voice told me this mattered to her more than the practical problem at hand. Graham had said memory. She heard grave. Then let the old king's stone hold up the new king's city, Graham said, and it was the first time I had ever heard him call me a king without a trace of doubt in his voice. Grief and use are not enemies, girl. He would rather his bones held up something alive than rot forgotten under 6 feet of silence. We opened the sealed chamber, and Graham was right about all of it. Cut stone bracing shaped generations ago, exactly for corridors this size. Load-bearing arches that his hands remembered even though his eyes had gone half-blind years before. He worked 2 full days, almost without sleeping, directing crews half his age through a technique none of them had ever seen, until the water channel that had nearly killed 6 of us stood reinforced with stone older than the mask itself, and did not so much as shift under the weight of the 5th full cistern. By the 7th day, the Crown Ledger finally gave me the number I had been waiting for. Water collectors, 5, full. Clinic beds, 12. Forge output, up 60 parts in 100. Underground city, level 1. Population, 160 core to 612 counted and working. Shara's clans, and Orvan's leftover defectors, and every hungry family the valley had sent us since the crypt first stopped being just a hole in the ground. Authority climbed with it, unstable finally giving way to something that held. Past 1200 towards 1600, and for one full evening the whole crypt smelled like fresh-cut stone and boiled grain instead of fear. I found Graham alone afterward, sitting near the reopened royal chamber with his hand resting flat against the old carved wall. And I did not interrupt him for a long moment, because some quiet belongs to the person keeping it. He built well, Graham said, not looking at me, meaning the old king, meaning 6 generations of stonework that had just saved my life without ever knowing my name would end up written over his sons. You are building well too. different hands, same bones underneath. I do not know if that is enough to beat blood in 7 days. I know it is not nothing. It was, I thought, the closest thing to a blessing I was going to get before the ritual, and I let myself hold on to it for as long as the walk back to my own chamber. Because that is precisely how long it took for Raga to find me, with a face that told me the good week was already over. A traitor reached the market gate an hour ago, she said. Leia's people caught him first. He says Dragul sent a rider south 3 days ago, not to gather warriors for the ritual, to Baron Odrin, offering safe passage through the old ridge road in exchange for one thing only, that the Baron's army move against this crypt before the 7 days are finished, so there is no fake king left standing to lose the ritual honestly. He never intended to lose a fair ritual, I said slowly, because saying it out loud was the only way to make myself believe it. He intended to make sure there was nothing left to challenge. Raga's face had gone hard, in the way it only went when she was already 3 steps ahead of the danger instead of reacting to it. Then we have less than 7 days, she said. We have however long it takes an army to march from a healer's tower to a crypt full of people who just spent every spare hand on water channels instead of walls. I stood in the doorway of a city I had built out of 7 desperate days and a dead king's borrowed stone, and understood, cold and clear, that Dragul had never actually planned to let the old law decide anything at all. He came into the main chamber 3 days before the ritual was even due, uninvited, unarmed, which should have told me immediately that he had not come to fight anything with a blade. His name was Skarn, Dragul's own shaman, older than Raga, marked across both forearms with faded ash tattoos that meant something in the old religion none of us younger goblins had ever fully learned. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way a man moves when he has already rehearsed every step of what comes next, and does not need to hurry through any of it. He walked to the center of the chamber, in front of a crowd already thick with the morning's business, and asked politely, almost gently, whether the returned king would honor an old rite of confirmation before all challengers arrived. I did not like the word confirmation. I liked it even less when Raga's hand found my wrist, cold and urgent, half a second too late to stop me from already having agreed in front of 200 witnesses. Refuse now, she whispered, so quiet only I could hear it, and you look like a man hiding something. Agree, and you may be handing him exactly what he came for. I had already agreed. There was no version of that morning where both choices did not end in the same place. And some part of me, the part that still remembered being a clerk who trusted paperwork over instinct, had simply believed a right could not prove a lie that had already fed 600 people. I was wrong about that, the way I have been wrong about very few things since the night I first put this mask on. The rite was old and simple, and, I understood only once it had already started, entirely unsurvivable for a lie. Skarn burned a pinch of grey-root incense and asked the mask directly, plainly, in front of the whole crowd, to confirm its bearer's blood. The mask, which had never once lied to me because I had never once asked it a question that mattered this much, did exactly what an honest object does when a dishonest man finally asks it something honest. It went cold against my skin, and every goblin close enough to see my face watched the color drain out of it in real time. And Skarn, with no triumph in his voice at all, which somehow made it worse, said simply, "The mask does not answer for a man with no goblin blood in him. It never has. It was hiding him instead." Nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. I did not deny it. There was no version of the next 10 seconds where denying it made anything better, and some truths only get uglier when you make people watch you try to outrun them. "I am human," I said, into a silence so complete I could hear the water channels running somewhere below us. "I have been human since the first night I put this mask on. Raga has known since the second night." I watched that second sentence land on Raga like a physical blow, because I had just done to her, in public, in one breath, exactly what she had spent months protecting me from doing to myself. The crowd's reaction was not one thing. It was 100 separate things happening at once, and none of them were kind. Goblins who had knelt to this mask the first night, who had called me the returned king through a fever, a battle, a flood of refugees, looked at my human face for the first time as though seeing it fresh, and recoiled, actually stepped back, the way you step back from something that has been standing closer to you than you realized. An old goblin near the front, one I did not even know by name, spat on the ground at my feet and walked out without a single word, and that silence hurt worse than any insult Skarn could have chosen. The Crown Ledger, merciless and honest as it had always been, gave me the number I had been dreading since the moment Skarn walked in. Authority, 1600, crashing towards 700, mask exposure, confirmed, faction split, visible. Raga did not run and did not hide behind me, which I will respect for the rest of my life, regardless of how this story ends. She stood where she was and told the truth herself, plainly, to a crowd that had every right to hate her for it. The old king died 3 nights before this human ever fell into our crypt, she said. I hid it because a tribe without a king was going to be a tribe torn into pieces by chiefs who wanted the pieces for themselves. I chose a lie that fed you over a truth that would have buried half of you by winter. I would make that choice again tonight, and I understand if none of you ever trust me the same way again. Some of the crowd turned on her harder than they turned on me, because I had at least been an honest fraud from the beginning, ignorant of what I was walking into, while Raga had known every single day and had let every one of them kneel to a lie she alone understood completely. An old woman near the healer's tunnel, one of the first goblins Raga had ever treated as Oracle, would not look at her at all, turning her whole body away like Raga had become something unpleasant to witness. That single small refusal seemed to cost Raga more than the shaman's entire ride had, and I watched her absorb it standing perfectly straight, because Raga does not let herself fold in front of a crowd, whatever it costs her afterward in private. Skarn watched all of it with the patient satisfaction of a man who had come to plant exactly this kind of wound and had watched it take root perfectly. He did not need to say another word. He simply turned and walked back out the way he had come, leaving 200 goblins standing in the wreckage of everything they had believed for 2 months, while I stood in the middle of it with a mask gone cold around my neck and nothing clever left to say. For a long, terrible stretch, nobody spoke at all. I did not try to fill it. I had learned, somewhere in the last 2 months, that filling a silence like that with a speech only proves you think words can fix what your own hands built the lie to hide. It was Nara who broke the quiet first, not with forgiveness, not with anger, simply with the truth of her own life laid flat on the floor of that chamber for anyone to look at. My son was dying 2 months ago, she said, quiet, to nobody and everybody at once. I do not care whose blood is under that mask. I care that he is alive to hate you tonight if he chooses to, instead of being a name I say to no one, because there is no one left who remembers him. Lena stepped forward next, still in her healer's apron, and did not defend me, did not soften anything, simply stated a number the way she had stated numbers her whole life. Plainly, because numbers do not lie, even when the men attached to them do. 17 people are alive in my clinic tonight who would not be alive under any chief this tribe has ever had before him, she said. That is not loyalty, that is arithmetic. Hate him if you need to. The arithmetic does not change either way. Gruna spoke without softness, because Gruna has never once offered softness to anyone. I have buried exactly 0 warriors under his command, she said. I buried plenty under the old way. Blood did not save any of them. Results did not lie either, until tonight, but the results are still standing in this chamber, whether the man is human or not. Shara's voice, when it came, was quieter, more careful, the voice of a woman who had learned the hard way what happens when you trust the wrong king. My clan has a home, because a fraud gave us one, when the truth would have left us walking into winter, she said. I did not choose him for his blood. I never once believed he had any to offer. I chose him because he asked what my people needed, instead of telling us what we owed him first. That distinction, small as it sounded, seemed to matter to more of the crowd than I expected. I watched a few more shoulders unclench, a few more feet stop drifting toward the tunnel where Dragul's guards waited. It was Crick, of all the voices in that chamber, who landed the blow none of the others quite managed, because Crick had never once in his life understood how to say a hard thing gently, and tonight that turned out to be exactly the right kind of honest. He is fake, Crick said, small and simple, into a silence that had gone raw enough to hear a person breathe. But the food is real, the beds are real, my cousin is real, and she is alive, and I do not care what is under the mask, if what came out from under it fed her. Something in that landed harder than anything Lena, or Gruna, or Shara had managed with careful words. Maybe because Crick had never once needed to be careful about anything. And the crowd's silence changed texture. Not warmer exactly, but no longer purely hostile either. It saved some of them. It did not save all of them. I counted the faces that stayed close to the clinic, the forge, the store, and I counted, with a sickness I will not pretend away, the faces that had already begun drifting toward the tunnel mouth, where 2 of Dragul's silent guards had appeared sometime during Skarn's rite, waiting. Dragul himself arrived only once the wound was already fully open, and he did not gloat, which somehow felt worse than gloating would have. You built something real, he told me, and I believe now that he meant it. That was never the argument. The argument was always whether a lie gets to keep what it built because the building turned out good. My people have an answer to that question, older than your mask. I am taking everyone here who still believes it. He walked out with perhaps a third of the chamber behind him. Warriors mostly. some of the older chiefs, a scattering of younger fighters who had never fully trusted the ledgers even at their best. Fesk went with him, the armed clan leader who had disarmed at our gate weeks ago and never quite forgiven the indignity of it. So did two of Gruna's own scouts, young enough that fear of the old blood still outweighed whatever loyalty 2 months of steady meals had bought them. Shara's people stayed. Nara stayed. Bruck, filthy and bandaged from the tunnel collapse 3 days earlier, planted himself in front of the store as he always had and did not move an inch. And when one of the departing warriors sneered at him for guarding a human's grain, Bruck simply told him the grain had never once cared whose blood carried it to a hungry mouth. And that was the last word spoken between them. The Crown Ledger, quiet now, offered no comfort and no verdict, only a single open line I had never seen it show before. Voluntary recognition, seed planted, status, still contested, choice, awaiting the tribe. I did not get more than a few minutes to feel any of it properly, because that was the exact moment Gruna's scouts came pounding down the main tunnel with the word that turned a crisis of faith into a fight for the city itself. Odrin's army, one of them shouted, still catching his breath. Banners on the ridge road, moving fast, already past the old boundary stones. How many? I asked, and the scout's answer told me how bad this was going to be. Enough that counting them slowed us down more than it helped, he said. More than we saw at the crypt siege. This is not a punitive column. This is a baron who intends to finish something. I looked at the third of my tribe, still walking away with Dragul, at Raga standing alone with her staff and her damaged name, at Gruna already turning to count how few warriors we had left to defend a city that had just lost a third of its strength in the same hour a human army arrived to finish it, and understood, with a clarity that felt almost like relief after so much doubt, exactly what Dragul's secret bargain with Odrin had actually been built to accomplish. He had never needed to beat me at the ritual. He only needed to make sure that when the true attack came, there would be nothing left standing united enough to survive it. And he had timed the wound to open exactly wide enough for an army to walk through it. Odrin's army made camp on the ridge above the graveyard by mid-afternoon, close enough that I could count banners from the crypt mouth without needing Gruna's spyglass. And I counted a great many more of them than the 30 knights Varric had brought the first time he tried this. A herald rode down alone under a white cloth an hour before dusk, close enough to shout, too far for an arrow, which told me Odrin had learned at least one lesson from his knight's earlier humiliation. Baron Odrin demands the return of the human traitor Kael and the healer Lena, property of this valley's lawful order, the herald called out, his voice carrying flat and official across the graveyard stones. Surrender them by dawn, and the rest of the vermin in that hole may live. Refuse, and every one of you burns with him. Property, I said out loud, mostly to myself, standing in the crypt mouth with Gruna beside me and a fractured tribe behind me. He still thinks I am a missing ledger entry instead of a problem he cannot afford to ignore. Gruna did not find it funny. We cannot win that fight in the open, she said, flat and precise, the way she always was when the math mattered more than the mood. Even with everyone who stayed, we are outnumbered badly, and a third of our best warriors just walked out the door with Dragul 3 days ago. If this becomes a straight battle on that ridge, we lose it before sundown. Then we do not give them a straight battle, I said. And the Crown Ledger, hearing something in my voice it apparently approved of, opened a function I had never seen before. War Ledger, active. Enemy supply routes, 4, marked. Weak points, visible. For the first time since Skarn's Right had cracked this tribe open, the mask was showing me something useful instead of something painful, and I intended to use every scrap of it. I gathered what was left of my unit heads in the war chamber that night, tired faces around a table that had held food store ledgers a week earlier and now held something closer to a battle map. Gruna would hold the tunnel mouths with what fighters remained, using the same doors and dead ends that had swallowed Varric's first column. Miva would break their formations with smoke the moment they committed to the crypt entrance, same as before. Harder this time, because she had spent the last week building a second batch strong enough to blind a much larger force. Leia, summoned through her own tunnel route, would cut every supply line she had ever sold access to, turning the same roads that had once made her rich off Odrin's blind spots into a noose around his own army's food and water. Shara did not have soldiers to offer, but she had something the battle needed just as badly. I will hold the people who are not fighting, she said. Frightened clans panic faster than armies do, and panic inside these tunnels kills more of us than any knight will. That is my part. Lena said she would be ready with 12 beds, and however many more we could improvise, and did not ask permission for that either, because by now, none of us needed to ask her permission to do the thing she had always done best. Raga said little through most of the planning, still carrying the wound of 3 days ago like a stone under her ribs. But when I finally asked her directly what she could offer, she answered without hesitation. I can still make this tribe believe it is fighting for something worth the cost, she said. That is not nothing, even from a woman half of them no longer fully trust. Let me do that much. It was not nothing. I told her so, and meant it, and watched something in her shoulders loosen slightly, the first easing I had seen in her since the right broke her standing in front of the whole crypt. We had, by the time the table cleared for the night, something closer to an actual war ledger than a desperate scramble. 5 separate threads pulling on an army that outnumbered us badly in every count except the one that actually mattered, which is that Odrin's soldiers knew this valley from maps, and we knew it from having nearly died building every corridor in it. The battle, when it came at dawn, did not look like a battle for most of its first hour. It looked like an army marching confidently into a hole that had eaten 30 knights once before, only this time it did not swallow them whole. It starved them slowly instead. Leia's people struck first, hours before Odrin's column ever reached the crypt, cutting the supply carts feeding his camp from 3 different roads at once, quietly, without a single visible goblin anywhere near the ambush sites. So that by the time his soldiers noticed their rations running short, they had no enemy to blame, only bad luck and worse plans. Miva's smoke came next, the moment the vanguard pushed into the crypt's outer chambers, thick and choking exactly the way it had broken Varric's first column. Except this batch carried something new mixed into the bog reeds, a bitter irritant that made men's eyes stream too hard to aim a crossbow properly, even after the smoke itself had cleared. I spent that first hour at the war table Graham had helped me build in the outer chamber, runners coming and going with numbers instead of blood, which was its own strange kind of battle, watching a fight I could not physically join, get won or lost, by whether a message reached the right tunnel in time. Shara held the frightened clans as promised, moving between huddled families with a calm that had nothing false in it, naming children by name, reminding old men where the nearest safe corridor ran. She turned what could have been a stampede into something closer to order, and more than one goblin who had drifted toward Dragul 3 days earlier found himself standing in her calm instead of his certainty when the fighting actually started. For most of the morning, it worked the way I had planned it, right up until the fighting reached into my careful plan and found the one gap I had left open in it. The part I forgot was that a third of my own tribe had just walked out that door 3 days earlier, and not all of them had walked far enough to stop caring what happened inside it. One of Gruna's own former scouts, the same young defector who had left with Dragul during the exposure, led a small human detachment to a side tunnel none of Leia's maps had ever marked, a route only someone who had trained inside our own defense could have known existed, and Gruna's forward squad found themselves suddenly flanked from a direction that should have been impossible. Cut off, hemmed against a collapsed junction with knights pressing from 2 sides at once, Gruna's squad held for longer than any reasonable person should have expected. But held is not the same as winning, and I felt the crown ledger flicker with something close to alarm. Tunnel network, partial compromise. Goblin squad, surrounded. A runner reached me white-faced with the report, and for one long, ugly second, I felt exactly the same helplessness that had nearly sent me running alone toward Odrin's tower weeks earlier. The certainty that people I loved were dying somewhere I could not reach fast enough to matter. I did not have a blade to send. I had a map, and a handful of laborers closer to that junction than any of Gruna's remaining fighters, and I sent the order anyway, because a king who freezes at the exact moment his people need a decision is worse than no king at all. It was Bruck, filthy, still bandaged from the collapse a week earlier, who reached them first, cutting through a side passage with a crew of laborers turned fighters for the day. Men who had spent the last week hauling stone instead of swords, and used exactly that unglamorous strength to break the human line from behind before it could finish closing. I have stood in enough shield walls to know what a real one looks like from the inside, Bruck told me afterward, breathing hard, blood on his knuckles that was mostly not his own. That was not a shield wall. That was men who thought hauling stone all week made me soft. I showed them otherwise. By midday, the human commanders on that ridge understood something Odrin himself apparently had not accounted for, which is that they were not actually fighting an army at all. They were fighting hunger, blindness, bad ground, and a clock that kept running out on their own supplies faster than it ran out on ours. 3 separate commanders, cut off from their own lines by collapsed corridors and choking smoke, chose surrender over a slow death in the dark, and the Crown Ledger tallied it plainly. Supply routes broken, 4 of 4. Commanders captured, 3. Goblin casualties, controlled, painful, but controlled. Varric himself we found near the crypt's outer chamber, cornered by Gruna's own blade after his personal guards scattered, rather than die for a man who had spent the whole battle shouting orders from safely behind them. He did not go easily. He still had enough fight left to wound one of Gruna's fighters before she finally beat the sword from his hand and put him on his knees in front of the same mausoleum stairs where he had once dragged Lena away as a criminal's wife. This is where it should have ended with a duel, the two of us facing each other the way stories like this usually demand, but I have never once been the man for that scene, and I did not intend to become him now just because the moment seemed to want it. "I'm not going to fight you," I told him, and watched something like confusion cross his face, like he had genuinely expected me to try. That was never the game I was good at. This is. Thomas stepped forward then, still favoring the arm Varric had wounded rescuing Lena weeks earlier, and he did not raise a blade either. He raised his voice instead, loud enough to carry to every knight still standing on that ridge, watching their commander kneeling in the dirt. "I served under this man for 2 years, Thomas said. I watched him sell requisitioned grain and steel to buyers who paid better than the crown, and blamed the shortfall on a supply clerk with no rank to defend himself. I have the ledgers in his own hand to prove it, copied by a healer he locked away as a witness because she treated his victims better than he ever did." Lena stepped up beside him and unrolled the bundle of stolen pages in front of the assembled knights, page after page of Varric's own careful, damning handwriting. It was requisitions filed and never delivered, coin taken and never reported. The exact crime I had been hanged for in front of my own soldiers, written in the one hand that had actually committed it. The knights who had marched here to punish a traitor looked at their own captain kneeling in the dirt and looked at the documents. And looked at me, standing unarmed, beside a rescued healer and a wounded man who had chosen truth over his own baron, and something in the whole shape of the morning rearranged itself in front of them. One of the older knights, a grizzled man I recognized from years of watching him drill recruits in the garrison yard, stepped forward and picked up a single page from Lena's bundle. He read it slowly, his lips moving over the numbers the way mine once did when I still balanced army ledgers for a living. He set it down without a word, looked at Varric kneeling in the dirt, and simply turned his back on his own captain, which told the rest of the column everything it needed to know faster than any verdict could have. Nobody cheered. Nobody needed to. Silence, when it is the right kind of silence, says more than any crowd could. Varric did not get executed and did not get pardoned. He got captured, alive, disarmed, handed over bound to his own former soldiers, who now had considerably more questions for him than loyalty left to spend defending him. The Crown Ledger caught up with the whole exhausting day in one long, unbroken line. I felt settle warm against my chest, warm for the first time since the right left it cold. Authority, 700, climbing past 2400. Status, Cave Chief, moving toward Horde Lord. I should have felt triumphant. Mostly I felt like a man who had not slept properly in 4 days and was currently held upright by pure stubbornness and the fact that too many people were watching me to allow myself to collapse yet. That was the exact moment Dragul reappeared at the tunnel mouth, unhurried as always, watching the last of Odrin's surrendered commanders being led away in chains. He watched his own people who had left with him standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, uncertain now whether they had backed the right side of history after all. "You survived the humans," he said, and there was no mockery in it, only the same patient certainty he always carried. Impressively, even. But the ritual was never about whether you could win a war. 7 days were promised. 7 days have nearly passed. I will not let a lucky battle change what the old law still demands of us both. I looked at my own hands, still shaking faintly from exhaustion I had not let myself feel until that exact second, and understood that the tribe had just watched me win a war through logistics, witnesses, and every system I had spent 2 months building, and that none of it was going to save me from what came next, because Dragul had never once cared whether I could outplan an army. He only cared whether I could survive him, and standing there exhausted in front of a war I had just won, without ever once raising a blade, I understood I was about to face the one enemy that no amount of clever paperwork was going to outplan. The ritual took place at dawn, in the throne chamber, before every goblin who had stayed, and a fair number who had left with Dragul and quietly drifted back to watch. Because even radicals want to see how a story like this actually ends. There were no clever tricks left in me. 4 days without real sleep, a war fought entirely through other people's hands, and a body that had never once been built for what the old law demanded now stood in a stone circle across from a man twice my strength who had rested comfortably while I bled my tribe's enemies dry through paperwork and tunnels. The rite was simple and old and utterly without mercy. 2 claimants, the mass between them, and whichever man could hold the crypt floor when the ash fire burned out would be the one the old law recognized. Dragul did not toy with me. I will say that for him, even now. He gave me the respect of ending it fast, instead of drawing out a humiliation neither of us needed. 3 strikes I barely saw coming and could not have blocked even rested, each one landing with a weight that reminded me, plainly, that I had never once been the kind of king who wins a room by force. The third put me flat on the stone, with the taste of blood in my mouth, and the mask's cord biting into my throat where he had wrenched it half off. And for one long, ugly heartbeat, the whole chamber tilted sideways around me, torches and faces smearing into a single gray blur. Gruna's hand went to her blade on instinct, and I saw Raga's staff come up beside her, and I understood, through the ringing in my skull, that if either of them moved to help me, the old law would call it interference and strip whatever claim I still had left. So I made myself shake my head at them from the ground, once, because some fights you have to lose honestly or not at all. This is what a real king looks like, Dragul said, standing over me, not cruel about it, simply certain, the way he had always been certain, strength that does not need a store, or a ledger, or a human's clever tongue to hold a floor. Yield the mask, and I will let this tribe keep everything you built. I am not my father. I do not burn useful things. The mask, still half around my throat, went warm against my skin in a way I had never felt before, and I understood with a cold drop in my stomach that it was listening to him, weighing blood freely offered against a claim that had never once been mine by right. I could not outfight what he was. I had known that since the first threat, since the first time Gruna warned me the old law respected proof as much as blood. What I had was not in my arms. It was standing all around that stone circle, watching. I do not yield, I said, blood in my mouth, voice cracked but not broken. Not because I can beat you, I cannot, because this crown was never mine to hold alone in the first place, and it is not yours to take alone either. Raga stepped forward first, into the circle's edge, close enough that the old law could not call it a weapon raised against Dragul, only a voice. I gave my knowledge to a lie for months, because a lie fed this tribe when the truth would have starved it, she said. I give it now to whatever this has become, freely, because I chose it, not because a mask makes me. Gruna followed, blade still sheathed, planting herself at the circle's edge like a wall that had decided to speak. I have buried nobody under his command. I have watched him think faster than any blade moves. Strength that only takes is not rule. I choose the man who built something worth defending. Miva came next, sharp as ever, even with her voice thick. He let me matter after a lifetime of being told my knowledge was poison, she said. I am not giving that up because a bigger man won a fight. Shara, quiet and certain. He asked what my people needed before he asked what they owed him. That is worth more than blood to a clan that has had nothing but blood asked of it. Leia, arms crossed, still transactional to the last. And somehow, that made it land harder. I have dealt honest men and dishonest men both. He is the first one who made me richer without once lying to my face about why. Lena knelt beside me on the stone, not to nurse me, to be counted, her hand finding mine in front of the whole tribe. I did not marry a king, she said, echoing words she had said to me in a tunnel days ago, but I watched a clerk become one honest debt at a time, and I am not leaving now that the bill has come due. Nara stepped up next, with her recovered son held against her hip, saying nothing at all, letting the boy's steady breathing be the entire argument. Graham followed, laying one weathered hand flat on the stone circle itself, the same gesture he had made over the old king's borrowed bracing, memory and use no longer at war in him. Thomas stood at the edge in his own colors, no longer any baron's man, simply present. Crick, small and fierce, planted himself dead center and announced to the whole chamber that he had personally witnessed every ridiculous, impossible thing this fake king had built. And he was not about to stop believing in impossible things now. Bruck came last, and the whole chamber seemed to hold its breath waiting for him. The one voice that had fought this crown from the very first night, from the first ledger, through every store rule he had ever called soft. He walked to the circle's edge, looked at me bleeding on the stone, looked at Dragul standing over me, certain of his old truths, and did not speak at all. He simply knelt, slow, and without a single word of complaint, the way a man kneels when an argument has finally, completely lost. And somewhere behind me, I heard more than one goblin, who had followed Bruck's grudging lead through half this story, quietly follow it one last time. The crown ledger, which had been weighing Dragul's freely offered blood against a claim built from nothing, suddenly had an entirely different weight dropped onto its scale, and it staggered under the sheer honest volume of it. Voluntary authority, it wrote, burning bright enough that every goblin in that chamber saw the light. Authority, 2,400, climbing past 10,000, and still climbing. Dragul felt it too. I watched the certainty finally crack across his face, not from any blow I had landed, because I had landed none, but from the simple, undeniable fact that the mask was no longer weighing his blood against an empty claim. It was weighing his blood against an entire kingdom's worth of people who had chosen, freely, loudly, without a single sword at their throats, to give their authority to someone else. "You cannot outfight what they just did," I told him from the ground. And for the first time since he had walked into my chamber, Dragul did not have an answer ready. He did not fall to his knees. He was never going to, and I would not have respected it if he had. He simply stepped back from the circle, looked at his father's mask, glowing brighter than it had ever glowed for him, and understood. The way a genuinely dangerous man understands when an argument is actually finished, that strength had just lost to something it could not cut down. "I built an army on the promise that blood still meant something in this world," he said, quiet now, almost to himself. "Perhaps it still does, somewhere. It does not mean anything here anymore." He turned and walked out of that chamber, the way he had walked into every room since I first heard his name. Unhurried, certain, except this time the certainty was aimed at a truth he had not chosen. I do not know if I will see him again. Some part of me suspects I will, because a man like that does not simply vanish from a story he still believes he lost unfairly. But he left that morning without taking a single soul with him, because there was no one left in that chamber still willing to follow blood out the door. The crown ledger settled, fully, into a status I had chased without ever quite believing I would earn it honestly. Status: first human goblin emperor. Base: underground city, seeding into something the mask itself did not have an old word for. Population: 612 core citizens, past 2,000 pledged across every clan that had ever knelt, fled, tested, or fought beside us. 6 core functions: oracle, war, alchemy, diplomacy, economy, medicine, standing where I had built them, in the hands that had earned them. Word reached us within the week that Varric faced judgment before his own former knights, stripped of rank, his crimes read into a formal record by men who had once called him captain. The exact humiliation he had once tried to hang around my neck instead of his own. Baron Odrin's grip on the valley's trade and taxes was already cracking, the tunnel routes that had once bled his treasury quietly now bleeding it openly, merchants routing around a lord who could no longer protect his own roads or his own reputation. Dragul's ideology had lost the field, but the man himself was still out there somewhere. And I did not let myself pretend that mattered less than it did simply because the mask had chosen to look away from him. I stood at the crypt mouth that evening with Lena's hand in mine, watching lantern lights spread across a city that had been a hole in the ground when I fell into it, and understood that I had not won a crown. I had built one, slowly, honestly, out of debts paid forward instead of promises made cheap, and the only reason it had held under Dragul's blade was that enough people had decided, on their own, that it was worth keeping. That peace lasted almost exactly 1 day, which is roughly what I have learned to expect from good news in this particular life. A rider from the eastern provinces reached our gates that night, exhausted, carrying word from 3 human kingdoms who had apparently spent the last 2 months watching a fugitive clerk build an empire under their own feet, and had finally stopped calling it a rumor. They were not sending another baron. They were sending a crusade, banners from every crown in the region, marching to erase the underground kingdom before it grew large enough that erasing it stopped being possible. I looked at Lena, at Raga's steady hands, at Gruna already calculating defenses in her head before the rider had finished speaking, and felt something that was not quite fear and not quite excitement, but sat close enough to both that I could not fully separate them anymore. We had built a kingdom out of nothing but a dead man's mask and a living man's stubbornness. A store that fed strangers, a clinic that saved enemies, a forge that armed the desperate, and enough people willing to stand in one circle and say out loud that they had chosen this on purpose. Now the whole surface world wanted to know exactly how hard that kingdom was going to be to kill. I still do not know what I am, not fully. Not the way Lena once demanded I answer honestly in a quiet tunnel. I know what this tribe built while I was figuring it out, and for the first time since a dead king's mask closed cold around my face, that felt like enough of an answer to start the next fight with.
So what did we actually watch here? A man with no magic, no rank, and no muscle takes a kingdom, and he takes it by doing the one thing everyone called worthless. He counts. He cleans the water, he feeds the sick child, he keeps a prisoner alive because a living man is worth more than a dead one. That is the lesson, and it is not a comfortable one. Power built on fear belongs to whoever is stronger that morning. Power built on results, on people who are fed and healed and armed and who choose you out loud cannot be taken by a single blade. Blood makes a claim, but work makes a king.